And then we bought like this old shitty Econoline that should have never made it out of the state, but somehow we made it around the country. And that thing, you just couldn't turn the engine off once it was up to once it was up to operating temperature, or it just wouldn't start again.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. And also, thank you for your patience on this break that I just had. Okay. My Pal Trigger were a punk/emo band from the great state of Florida. Their members were David, Jack, Jeremy, and Thomas, and you most likely saw them playing a lot of shows in the late 90s with the band Discount. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information out there about these guys because apparently they're afraid of Wikipedia. So luckily for you, there's this episode to learn a lot about them. I remember hearing about them a couple ways back in the late 90s. One, they played a backyard show at Alan Rappaport's house in Wayne with Discount. And the other way I heard about them is through my buddy Price, who had their CDs. There's Hope and No Tomorrow, and then he got Lessons in Ancient History, which Lessons in Ancient History was definitely my favorite of the albums that they put out. It was just a little bit more polished, and I think they had just found their sound through that record. You can, however, go find a bunch of their stuff on ashtray.monumentcol.wixsite.com. You can just go to the show notes and click on that link, and it'll take you there. I reached out to David and Jack, asked if they wanted to chat, and they were thrilled, and this is what we talked about. Destroying punk houses on tour, the new metal version of My Pal Trigger, Jack meeting his drum teacher in a random parking lot, the schoolhouse venue in Florida, talking about the Jersey scene, the enormous size of Florida, the band Chooch, long-ass drives on tour, Wesley Willis, the rope swing story, and a ton more. This week's episode is sponsored by Creep Records, the best record store in Philadelphia. You can order online at creeprecords.com for a $5 flat rate shipping fee on as many records that you buy. They also have a smoke shop where you can buy fun-shaped glass pipes to enjoy all of that tobacco that you buy on the streets. Fun fact, you can listen to my interview with Eric, who owns Creep. You could just scroll down on the podcast app you're listening to episode 37. Check it out. It's a pretty great episode. It talks a lot about how Creep came about, Plow United, and the great state of Pennsylvania, or the great city of Philadelphia, one of the two. So definitely go to creeprecords.com and stock up on a bunch of stuff and have it sent to your house. Make sure you check out the new merch I have on thiswasthescene.com, and thank you again for all the people who have donated to the podcast and who are patrons. If you want to be either of them, just go to thiswasthescene.com and click the buttons on top of the page. There's one for click to donate, and there's also the sign up to be a patron, and you can choose your own adventure. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some nostalgia. Definitely share this with people because that is the way people are finding this podcast, and they're usually like, holy shit, I didn't know this was here. And then they have to catch up with like 51 episodes. So this will help them not have to catch up with 100 episodes in about a year from now. With that said, let's get started. What did you guys play in the band again? Like, what did you? Because I remember, because I listened to you guys back then. I got into Lessons in Ancient History, and you guys had come through Jersey, and I remembered. I think in the beginning you guys were a three-piece, weren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, but which guy? What did you guys? Because I can't find any fucking information on you guys at all on the line.
Yeah, we're working with our buddy Drew right now. He has this website, ashtray.monument.com, and so I've been sending him, I'm slacking, I need to send him the bio and stuff, but he's been like adding like all the old My Pal Trigger tunes to Spotify and to his website. But when we started, it was myself and Jack and Thomas, and I was playing bass and singing. Thomas was playing guitar and Jack was playing drums. And so we had a few lineup changes in a couple of years that we were a band, but by Lessons in Ancient History, that was Jack and I had moved over to guitar and vocals, and then we brought in Jeremy Krolak and Mike Jolly for guitar and vocals and bass.
Okay, and Jack, what did you do again? I'm sorry, I totally missed what you
I played drums the whole time.
Okay, all right. Yeah, because the one thing I remembered, and don't take offense to this, Dave, but I always remembered, like, you guys, when I saw you as a three-piece, was a pictures from a Jersey show this guy, Alan Rappaport, put on. and it was in his backyard. Because even in the email that you sent me, Dave, you said you remembered playing. You had like all these lists of shows you guys played, and you said even like backyard pool parties. That was this guy Alan's house in Wayne, New Jersey.
Oh, right on. Yeah, I remember it was Wayne. That was like one of the funnest shows we had played up there.
Yeah, and I remember the picture because it was like you guys in Discount, but I remember just like this tall, skinny bass player. That's always how I remembered you guys.
Yeah, that was me, the tall, skinny dude.
Sorry, that's like bad to say, but I always remember that. And then, like you had a very distinct voice too. That's what I remember. It was very like monotone.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, which I
Yeah, I
don't.
was never too stoked on it. Like on all the recordings and stuff, like it's definitely ducked down in the mix and stuff. Like it was what it was.
Jack, you're in Denver right now?
Yeah. I moved out to Denver a few years ago, and now I'm sort of a middle coaster.
Okay. Yeah, how's it like being so far from water?
I don't mind it at all. I mean, I've moved around so much throughout my entire life, and I think that sort of contributes to me getting, I've relocated so many times. I mean, Dave and I moved to Richmond at one point right after My Pal Trigger, and then Dave moved to New York, and then I moved to New York, and then I moved back to Florida. So I mean, I'm sort of nomadic, I think, that way.
Oh wow. Yeah, I actually live in Raleigh, so I'm about 2 hours south of Richmond.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. Did you guys ever make it down here at all when you were living there?
I mean, we've been through Raleigh a number of times. I mean, I think the majority of our tours, obviously because we were coming up from Florida, we would always head up. The first shot was to head up the East Coast.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've driven through Raleigh, God, I don't know, 30, 40 times in my life probably, or been, stayed in and around there, and so we're pretty familiar with anything on the East Coast. We did a lot of.
Yeah, back then it was pretty it was not what it is now. I heard it was like a giant shithole back in the day. It was kind of like, I remember my old band played in Durham one time. We were at Duke University, and the people they were like, yeah, this town is just beat up as shit. And now it's awesome. But back then, I think when, 20 years ago, when we were going through these towns, we'd be like, these places are sketchy as fuck.
Yeah, I remember Asheville was really, really nice, and that was cool. And like Wilmington, we had like fun shows there, and that was like a cool little coastal town. But like, yeah, I remember Raleigh, Durham was like, compared to the rest of the state, it was a little bit more urban and sketch.
Yeah,
at the time.
Sketch. Yeah, I think like the last 5 years it's completely shifted. It's these big tech booms and all this crap, but I'm not going to talk about that for the entire time. But
yeah, I was visiting Jack out in Denver recently. I had this old like 76 Toyota Chinook camper that I restored. I spent the last couple of years just traveling around in that and working, and
wow.
It's kind of crazy. I was trying to figure out like where the venues were that we played. I just remember like that part of Denver, like they're like, dude, don't leave your van like unattended, like just play and get out. And like everything down there is like, luxury malls and like big glass condos, but I couldn't even find that part of town or remember what that was or where it was.
Isn't that the craziest thing though? Because in Jersey, I mean, I lived there for 36 years. There was like a stint where I was in LA for a little bit when I was like in my 20s. But now that I'm in North Carolina, I remember that we played these shows down here, and I've been like, when I did the Brain interview, I was talking to them. Braid. I said Brain. When I talked to Chris, I asked him about. There was some place, yeah, when they did Actuality of Thought, because a lot of that was. Did you ever see that DVD or that VHS documentary back in the day?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh my God, dude! It was this compilation of. It had like Jejune, Get Up Kids, Braid, Cave In, Promise Ring, and they're all playing in like houses in these little tiny clubs, and a lot of it happened in North Carolina. So I've been trying to go find them now to see like what those places look like,
I mean, I know we played a house show in North Carolina on I think our first tour, because I think back then like that was everywhere. We had in Tampa and almost any town had kind of a punk house where they would put on shows, and I do remember playing in North Carolina. I think there was also on that same tour. I think actually it was the tour after that, the Discount tour. There was a house in Wilmington that was the punk house that we played, and then after the show, all these kids from the town came in and just smashed the place to pieces. And it was, I think as a younger punk kid, that seems appealing, but I remember at the time being like terrified and just being, looking around and being like, I don't think this is okay. And it was very strange.
There was some beef with like the landlord or the property owner or whatever, and he was evicting him or kicking him out. But like it wasn't just like busting through drywall. Like I remember like a clawfoot tub coming through the ceiling while like Discount was trying to load out their equipment.
Where was this again? This was in North Carolina?
Yeah, Wilmington.
Yeah.
I think there was a girl, Tammy, that was like a friend of ours that like helped or put us in touch with somebody that was setting up shows. But yeah, I'm 99% positive that was in Wilmington, North Carolina.
That's so weird. We played a show in like the middle America, and the same thing happened to us where we stayed with these kids and they were getting evicted. And when we're all drinking, they made a game where it was the bathroom and the door was open and everyone was just throwing their empty bottles at the toilet and smashing glass all over the floor.
Oh God.
Jeez.
Yeah, so maybe that was like a thing back then where everyone's getting evicted from the punk house. Like, fuck it. Let's destroy it.
Yeah. Crash and burn.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm going to dive into this and go, and anyone listening, My Pal Trigger, all of you guys were from Florida, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so these guys were a Florida band, and I remember they came through Jersey a couple times, but I always remembered them coming through with, like, I always associated you guys with Discount because I just like, did you just do one tour with those guys, or did you do?
No, I think more so than like any other band that we played with back then. Like we just clicked with those guys, like Ryan and Allison and James and Bill and Todd, and everybody were awesome. So they were just right across they were like 127 miles across. We're on the west coast of Florida, and they were in Vero Beach.
Okay.
And so we played like a ton of shows with them, like, throughout that period, like all over Florida. We did like, I want to say 2 or 3 like East Coast or like US tours with them. And so, yeah, like I think I want to say 2 or 3 times we probably came through New Jersey with those guys. And I think we played there with like Flynn as well. And maybe Nova Jest. We did a tour with them up the East Coast, and Band Versailles from Florida as well, like later on.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought I remembered that right. Just always thinking of the two of you guys just always being together. Because there was a couple bands out there that would always tour together, things like that. But I want to go back to like the start of before we get into My Pal Trigger, and I also want to talk about this metal band too that took the name that's from Florida. Have you guys?
Are they from Florida? I didn't know. Oh, I remember. I remember just going down some, Googling, like if you Google yourself, I think back in, I don't know, 2010 or whatever, and I Googled My Pal Trigger and I saw this band come up and I'm like, wow, I wasn't like irritated by it. I'm just like, wow, that's such a random like thing to name your band after. Because, when we were starting out and trying to find a name, we literally picked My Pal Trigger out of a TV guide. Like we were just looking. I think I still have the page in a box somewhere, and we're just sitting there bouncing these awful names off each other, and somehow we ended up My Pal Trigger stuck. And then to see something years later of another band randomly choose this thing that doesn't. It was just such a strange thing. I'm like, oh, that's a weird thing to name your band after.
Well, isn't there a club? Isn't there a club in Florida called Rascals? Is that where that is?
Shit, I have no idea.
I thought for some reason I heard that in one. Again, I'm fucking 40, so I think a lot of things I'm making up here that are present. I remember everything in the past completely, pretty concrete. But I remember, or I just recently I saw a video of these guys, and they're playing this club called Rascals. And I was like, I thought that I heard somebody talk about a place like that, which made me think Florida for some reason. But yeah, I was kind of bummed out because I was like, oh, cool, there's all this, I could do a little research on you guys, but it's just this fucking metal band. I'm like, God damn it.
Or we had stopped we weren't really active like right when the internet was getting popping up or whatever, so there wasn't like any music or videos, or I think there's like 3 pictures online. And so, yeah, when those guys came about, they started posting on like YouTube videos and stuff, and it got a little weird for a little bit. Like when I'd meet people in New York and stuff, and they're like, I used to play, music. What band were you in? And it's like, oh, My Pal Trigger. Like they didn't want to say because if they Googled it, it just came up with that like suburban, angry, like white dude rock from Florida. And it's like, no, it's not that band, I swear.
Yeah, they have an album called like We Coalesce, and it's all this like decayed looking font. I'm like, I don't think this is you guys.
Yeah, those guys are super angry.
That was my only concern, is that someone would see that and be like, man, those guys took a turn I would never have expected.
I kind of thought that for a second. I said, oh, they adjusted to the times.
Oh boy.
All
I was
right.
doing some work this week and looking for web domain stuff, and I actually searched, and mypaltrigger.com was available. Like, it had lapsed. I was like, shit, I'm gonna snag that back and post some pictures and like all the flyers and shit. So we should just grab that. I'm gonna set that up over the next month or so.
Oh, nice. Oh, very cool. Actually, when you guys, oh, yep, you got. I didn't even think to look there. Yeah, because by the time this comes out, it'll probably be like a month from now. So you'll be that'll be good timing for anyone's going to look for any of that stuff. Well, cool. But all right, so I want to go back to the origins when you guys were young lads and talk about what got you into music and then how that progressed to you liking punk and emo, or just getting into that whole genre.
Jack, you want to go first?
Sure. So, I mean, I grew up listening to, I was an MTV generation kid, so I grew up on what was on television. And, I got into all the mid-'80s stuff on, I didn't have a cool older brother or cool friends, that were into awesome music at the time. So, I consider it awesome music, but I grew up on MTV stuff and got into later on like hair metal, and I was really into like Motley Crue and Poison and Def Leppard and bands like that.
Hell yeah.
And then got into more, I got into more, Slayer and Iron Maiden and bands like that. And then I started playing music with some friends of mine when I was like, 12 or 13. It was one of those things like literally 3 kids sitting around like, we should start a band. And we all went home and, begged our parents to buy instruments. And, we had paper routes and stuff like that. And we had, this cover band that was, we played whatever was on the radio. I think we were playing, Pearl Jam songs and stuff like that. And I moved to Florida, and at some point, a mutual friend got me in touch with Dave and Thomas, who were already playing I think at Dave's house. And I didn't really have a huge introduction to punk rock before meeting those guys. I'd been to, I think I'd seen NoFX open for Fishbone in like 1993 or something like that. And I was that band's cool.
Where'd you see that?
That was at Janus Landing in Tampa. I was into Fishbone because, I was a high school nerd. And I went to see them, and NoFX opened for them, and I was kind of blown away by it. I was like, wow, that's really great. And my only thing before that was when I lived in Bowie, Maryland when I went to between like 6th and 9th grade. And I remember a buddy of mine there gave me a Fugazi tape, the 13 songs tape. And I remember listening to it and being like, man, these songs are great, but they're recorded like shit. Just because it didn't sound like that, that perfectly produced record that I was used to as a kid.
Oh yeah.
And I remember I did actually get to see, and it didn't have as big of an impact on me in the moment that it should have. But I remember going to the Crofton Fire Hall in Bowie, Maryland when I was like 14 or 15. And I got to see the P-Tanks and a couple other bands, like the Skunks and 32 Mildreds and these Bowie bands. And it was it kind of terrified me in the moment because it was such a raw place to see a show in a little tiny place and everybody's going crazy. And when you're a little kid, you're like, this is terrifying. So, when I ended up started playing with Dave and Thomas, that was when they kind of pushed me in the direction and introduced me to a bunch of bands that I'd been playing music for a little while, but I knew what was on the radio and what was, I knew of Green Day and Bad Religion and bands like that. So yeah, I don't have like this cool punk backstory that, I have friends of mine that are like, yeah, I got into the Descendants when I was 11 years old. And I didn't do that at all.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I had, but everyone's like, Black Flag and the Misfits. Like I didn't listen to that until I was in my 20s probably, which is just it's a strange evolution. It just wasn't what I had access to. And I was still, I listened to metal.
Oh, that's the same way, dude. I was all into metal. We would play shows. Yeah, when we played shows, I had like a Tool sticker on my bass, and my band was like, "Yo, you gotta get rid of that sticker." It's like, fuck, man, they're so good.
Oh, dude, I remember catching so much hell for I don't remember what tour we were on, but I drove a lot, which gave me a carte blanche to kind of play whatever I wanted,
Oh,
and I would
always.
torture these.
Always.
I think there was a Rage Against the Machine record that came out, and whatever, I love that stuff. So I'm throwing that on, and it's just me like listening to this, and like four just miserable dudes sitting in the car, like, do we have to listen to this? I'm like, yeah, we do have to listen to this.
I think at some point that's why Jeremy bought that Joey Lawrence tape, just to like change it up or like revamp.
yeah.
Amazing.
Oh yeah.
I remember that video too.
That happened. Yeah, the Joey Lawrence thing, and then in retaliation for that, I think someone bought. There was some hip hop song out at the time that was the most annoying thing on the planet. Oh, that was that "Make 'Em Say song. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
Somebody bought the single to that, and like that would be kind of like it would be 2 a.m. and you're driving through nowhere, and like somebody would put that tape on and crank it all the way up, and it was just it was almost like this weird like trying to annoy the other people, which in hindsight is terrible because we would always get home and be like, I don't want to talk to you guys for at least a month. And I think some of that, I'm sure, that
it's probably like why so many bands broke up. It was just the time in the van where you're like, dude, fuck your playlist.
It could have been avoided through carefuler music selection.
Yeah, right. Like all these great bands would still be around. It's like if everyone just knew how to find a good Spotify playlist and just add all their stuff in. Dave, let me actually like Jack go on.
Oh no, I was saying I think that's the thing now. Like when you're driving around in a van, like everybody's kind of got, I'm sure everybody has their iPods and their iPhones, and you can sit there and live in your own little bubble. And we never really did that. We always had whatever was on the radio, and it would all, you were sort of subjected to whatever anybody else was listening to.
That's a really good point, actually. Everyone probably has their phones and headphones in, so everyone's ignoring each other the entire time so they can get along better. Dave, all right, I'm gonna jump back because this will eventually mesh with the two of you. You'll be able to like take it on together. But I want to go back to you. Like, what was your story about getting into music?
So I grew up I was born and raised in New York, and gosh, in like 5th or 6th grade, I met this kid, Christian McGrath, who was like, I don't know, like wise beyond his years, or like super, like was already into like really interesting music and stuff. And he was like, dude, there's this band Duran Duran. They have like a single out. They've got this, their full lengths coming out. So I remember like, like leaving school, and like that was the first album or like piece of music that I ever bought was the self-titled Duran Duran record.
Yep.
And a couple of years later, my parents divorced, and my mom and sisters and I moved down to Florida. And I met this girl, Audrey, when I started school down there, and she was into like the Smiths and Flesh for Lulu, like Joy Division, New Order. So I kind of missed out on the whole metal or top 40s thing and just skipped right into like, Britpop and new wave stuff at the time. And so I was into that for like, for a few years. And then I moved from South Florida to Cocoa Beach, and I met this kid, Mark Huff, this skater kid. And he was super into like all the old Lookout bands of the day. So he had given me like a tape with like Op Ivy and Green Day and some like Screeching Weasel stuff and the Queers, and was just like immediately like blown away. And so I guess like right as I was finishing up, I was going to Brevard Community College and living in Cocoa Beach at the time and just surfing a bunch and doing ESA contests.
Nice.
Me and a couple of friends were like, oh, let's start a band or learn instruments. So one of my buddies, Chris, bought a drum set. I bought like a really shitty crate bass amp and like a Fender Squier bass. And my buddy Jason had like an old like Washburn pointy guitar or something. And so everybody was kind of just making racket and self-taught. And when I graduated a few months later, I had like a bunch of friends that were moving to Tampa to go to USF out there. And so I just hopped in the van with those dudes. And right when I got out to Tampa, within like a week or two, we started looking around, and there was like, like a pretty decent local scene out there in the time. And I remember the first show I went to there was at the Stone Lounge, and it was this band Pogo, I want to say Chester, and maybe My Own America. And like all three of those bands at the time were fucking stellar. Like they still are. Pogo actually is, I just saw they're playing here in a couple of weeks. They're on tour with Jawbreaker right now, which is awesome.
What?
But yeah, so stoked to see that for those guys. Like they're super deserving and really incredible band. But yeah, so I met like, the dudes, Kobe and the guys from Pogo that day, and Chester, like Chris and Mike and Heath and Dave Gunner. And they were all like super accommodating, and well, like I became friends with those dudes. And then I I was playing with Chris, the kid from Cocoa Beach. He was playing drums and I was playing bass, and we were kind of trying to write songs. And then Chris kind of decided he didn't want to do it. I met Thomas Ellison, and then a couple weeks later, our mutual friend Amanda put us in touch with Jack, and he just drove out. He was living out in Bloomingdale at the time, and he drove out to where I was, kind of in like, not the hood, but not exactly the best part of Tampa. We were just practicing in my bedroom or garage there for the first few months and started working on songs. And so, yeah, I started out with a lot of Britpop and like new wave stuff when I was younger.
Well, let me ask you about that, actually. That kind of triggered because I come from, my parents got divorced when I was 10. And I think looking back, I kind of was looking for something, because that like really puts you in a really fucking weird direction, right? It kind of bums you out. Like, do you think that when you got, because you're in New York, your parents get divorced, and I'm not going to like dive into like this whole personal history, but do you think there was a connection at that time when you got to Florida where all that shit was going on, and so you're getting like, you meet this person who's like, oh, here's Joy Division, and like here's all this like sad, like really melodic music. Do you think you kind of gravitated towards that more because of what was going on?
No, I think for sure that has like an impact, or there's some kind of an association. Like a lot of kids that I knew at the time that were into like, fuck, who's big back then? Like Bon Jovi, I think, was like really big on the radio. A lot of people were into like hair rock or loud shit or metal. And so like all like the English shit had like a lot much, like way darker lyrics, or like, darker lyrics, poppy presentation, or a much more somber tone. So I think, yeah, to people in that kind of situation, like it might be a little bit more accessible or relatable.
Yeah, I always felt like I wanted to hear those songs more, even though they were like really moody. I'm like, I want to feel this like shitty right now. Like I want to feel sad.
Yeah, I think I was pushing it a lot, like, because like nobody else does, right? Like everybody fucking hated the Smiths and Morrissey, and that was, I had like a cassette case full of tapes that I'd take in the tour van and shit, and there were people like, geez, please, not again, I'm gonna slip my fucking wrist. Like, no, it's good, man. Dude,
I was listening to like I put this Spotify list together on obviously on Spotify, and I was listening to it the other day, and I'm like, I attached myself to this stuff, but I think if someone was in the room, they'd be like, dude, are you okay?
Like, exactly.
It's so moody, but it like makes me happy, or it just makes me feel like I like a connection to the songs, but I'm like, wow, I really like really dark shit. I was like,
yeah, man, same here. And like, 25 years later, or, however long it's been later, like I'm 45 now. And like, I find myself, I still listen to like a ton of the old, like Superchunk, Chapel Hill, like DC Discord kind of stuff. And then right up there mixed in with like, Archer's Loaf and Superchunk and all that is like still the Smiths and New Order and Joy Division. And so, yeah, like it's, kind of stood the test of time. Like a lot of stuff have kind of, come and gone, but like I still find those in constant rotation.
Yeah. It's like you were like, I want to live in the pain. So when you said you guys formed, was this in high school when you guys, because you said it was you and Thomas, and then Jack, you joined. Is that correct?
Yeah, Thomas and I went to the same we were still in high school. Thomas and I we went to the same high school. And I knew who he was, and we'd met, I think, once or twice, but we weren't close. And we had a lot of the same mutual friends, which I think is, that's how that kind of worked out. But yeah, it was my senior year of high school at the time.
Did you guys like at any point before you started the band? Because I remember like I've talked about this a lot in a lot of episodes where I really wanted to be in a band when I was younger. Did you guys have that same aspiration at that time, or was it just something you were just going, well, we can either go hang out at the convenience store parking lot, or we could skate, and I suck at skating, or we could be in a band? Like, what got you into, like, what was your mindset like when you started the band?
Well, I started a band when I was like 12 or 13 in Bowie, Maryland with my friends, and we played a battle of the bands, and we played a few shows, and then I moved to Florida, and I played music with people that I met at school, and was in a couple of bands that played locally in Bloomingdale kind of stuff. And so I was firmly, I played with anybody I could find. So when I met David and Thomas doing this, like, that was natural for me. Like I knew I wanted to play music, and the idea of touring and having like a band that went and did things wasn't really something that I even thought was possible. It just wasn't. It was so outside of my concept of playing music. My concept of playing music was, hey, we'll get together and we'll hang out and we'll talk about music and we'll play music and we'll write some songs, and that'll be super fun. And that was all my aspirations for it at all. But that was what I wanted to do for sure.
What about you, David?
I think for me, like, you know, I'd also been super interested in music, and like, it's like, oh, it's something I want to learn, or like, you know, learn to play guitar. And so like when when I met Jack and Thomas and started My Pal Trigger, like I think I literally had owned a bass for 6 months. Like I, you know, learned to play just by mimicking like Green Day and Bad Religion songs or whatever. And then, you know, just started. And so like, you know, when you listen to the My Pal Trigger stuff that we recorded, you know, all that was recorded over the course of just a couple of years. But like, you know, it started like really poppy and stuff. And as we, you know, actually learned how to play, and, you know, Jack was a great drummer, like when I'd met him, but like Thomas and I were still, you know, kind of getting our sea legs off or on, whatever the expression is, and like learning our instruments. And so, you know, and especially more so like when we got like Jeremy and Mike in the band, like it changed a lot. But for me, like, you know, like same thing as Jack. Like I was just like, oh, dude, I just want to, you know, play music and hang out with friends in the garage and stuff. Like, you know, none of us were like drinking or smoking, doing drugs or anything. And it was just like a good way to spend time. And then I noticed, like when we started going out to shows in Tampa and like seeing like, you know, Pogo and Hank Shaw and like a lot of the local bands, like it was kind of crazy to see like the amount of support, and that was just like kids putting this stuff together, and everything was kind of accessible, I guess. Like there wasn't so much like in groups and out groups. It was pretty inclusive. And like, if you wanted to be part of it, like you could either be a promoter and help set up shows, or, you know, a lot of kids ran distros and sold like, you know, 7 inches and tapes out of the trunk, out of the back of their car.
Yeah.
And so that was the first time in my life that I had like, you know, kind of experienced like that kind of, you know, it planted a seed. I was like, oh shit, there's a lot of possibility here with this. And then when we met like Ryan and Allison and Bill and James and like the Discount and the Schoolhouse Kids, like Yvette and her sister and the guys that were, and girls that were putting on shows out there, I was just like, oh shit, there's this whole like underground network. And like, you know, if you put in the effort or the time or whatever, like, you know, anyone can be part of it. And so, yeah, that's the long version. But
I love the how, you know, like once you get your eyes open to something, your brain starts formulating all these possibilities of, oh wow, like I can actually do these things now. It's kind of like it's a weird example, but I've been hearing this a lot. It's like the guy who did like the 4-minute mile. Like everyone said, like they were like, we don't know how this could happen, and all of a sudden he did it, then everyone starts doing it, right? So so sometimes you have to see something first, and then your mind goes, oh man, like maybe I could put on a show, or I could now, shit, I can actually be in a band, and like this is where we'd practice, and this is how we get on shows, and we can get a fucking van and go on tour. Like your mind just, it's almost like it's given permission to go, yeah, you can do all this shit, and you're going, all right, I'm gonna fucking do it.
No, that's a great analogy. Or I think like on a similar note, like, you know, like the like pioneers of like big wave surfing, like back on the North Shore, like a bunch of dudes like standing at the beach looking at like massive like Second Reef Pipeline or Waimea Bay, and just like, dude, you'll fucking die if you go in the ocean. And at some point, some dude just being like, fuck it, I'm gonna go out. And then his friends are like, well, shit, I'm gonna look like a puss if I don't paddle out too. And eventually, you know, they get their ass handed to them for a while. Eventually somebody makes a wave and you're like, oh shit, that's makeable. And then you look at like what people are doing like 25 years later. And so, yeah, like, you know, in a similar note, like the music scene, or it's just like, it was the first thing that I was exposed to, where I was like, oh shit, there's a lot of possibility here. And it's like all down to like, you know, if you're willing to put in the time, and like the whole DIY ethic of everybody kind of doing things for themselves and not relying on like, you know, external sources or resources to get shit done was like extremely appealing.
Well, you got to think too about like just the amount of, you know, I don't know. Yeah, I'll just say it, but like the amount of balls you kind of have to say, you know what? I'm watching these guys, like you're watching Pogo and shit like that, and you're thinking, I want to be up there. I think there was a huge gap between the people who just wanted to go to shows and consume music, and then the other people said, I think I could write a song, and I really want to be facing me from up there. You know, and so they're just like, I'm gonna just write a fucking song, and just it's just like just that alone, and then getting up in front of people that first time and saying like, well, fuck, shit, now here I am. This is crazy. Like, do you actually real quick? I'm always intrigued by this, and I don't think I ever really asked this, but David, like when you were learning bass, and Jack, I'm asking the same thing. Like, how did you practice, or how did you teach yourself?
I just had like a, you know, shit ton of CDs of bands that I really liked. And like, you know, I'd go through just like, you know, like in order of complexity. And so like, you know, Bad Religion or Green Day, like it's like, man, they write awesome fucking catchy songs, but like, you know, and it's hard to write really good, simple pop songs or whatever, but all their stuff was super accessible. The chord progressions were super obvious. And so I'd like literally sit there with headphones, like when I lived in Cocoa Beach and, you know, there was no waves or it was flat, you know, right before I moved to Tampa. And I just sit there and just spend hours just like mimicking other stuff or, you know, and I still to this day, like I can't read sheet music, like I can't play scales. I have no fucking idea what I'm doing with an instrument, but I can start with a melody in my head and figure out how to transpose, you know, where those notes or chords lie on a guitar or bass or a keyboard. And so, I basically just started, you know, playing by myself. And then, you know, when I met Jack and Thomas had a little bit more, you know, like a head start, like playing guitar, and he was, you know, somewhat competent. And Jack was, like I said, from day one, like he was by far always the most talented one in our band. He was a really good drummer. And so at that point, it was kind of like, you know, just getting pushed to keep up. Like it was really cool motivation and stuff. Cause I was like, fuck man, I'm the weak link in the chain here. And so, you know, just putting in the extra effort or just, you know, trying to actually learn what I was doing while we were doing it. And so I listened back to like, you know, all the first, like the 7 inches and records we did. And it just makes me fucking cringe. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I wish we would have waited a little longer to record but at the same time, like when you're, you know, young and super enthusiastic and stuff and just having the opportunity to do those things, I was like, you know, stoked in that respect.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool though. Cause I was thinking the same thing when you had said earlier that you were about 6 months into you guys, 6 months into playing bass when you joined the band. And then Jack, you said he was really good. And that like motivated you to want to say like, you know what, either I can just stop playing and go hide, or I could be like, I got to step up my game somehow and just sit in my room and just play. But it's also super fun to do this at the same time. Jack, what about you, man? Like what? Yeah.
Well, I'm stunned sometimes, you know, with drummers and stuff, because when anybody who starts playing drums when they're younger in their early teens has to have, you know, absolute saints for parents, because I know how bad I was for a very long time.
Yeah.
And you know, it was one of those things like when you go home and you're like, Mom, I want to play guitar, and they get you a guitar, maybe some headphones or an amp you can play in your room fairly quiet. There's no way to hide drums. Like I can't imagine the torture that I put my parents through, just because you're learning. And I didn't have really too much formal training at all. I was literally just in my room trying to teach myself, you know, Def Leppard songs and Motley Crue songs and Rat songs, and, you know, just sitting in my room playing that kind of stuff. And then I remember going to the mall that I had lived walking distance from a mall in Bowie, Maryland. And I went up there with some friends and I bought some drumsticks at the little music store. We're standing out front of like, you know, a Little Caesars or something. And I'm flipping a stick in the air. Like, no idea what I'm doing. I'm like 13 years old. And some guy, this story sounds weird, but this guy pulls up in a truck. He's like, "Hey man, you play drums?" And I'm like, "Kind of." And he gave me his card, and my, you know, I went home and I'm like, "Mom, this guy in a truck gave me this card." It sounds weird. And so, you know, I was like, "He teaches drums." And she called the guy, and, you know, he was probably in his early 20s, but, you know, he lived at his parents' house not far from us. And you know, my parents talked to him and we went over there, and he had this like amazing, huge drum kit. The guy was amazing, still to this day in my head, like one of the best drummers I've ever seen play drums. He was phenomenal. And I would go over there for, you know, an hour a week or whatever. And, you know, he got me into like the Police and Dire Straits. And like, he would show me, he was like, "No, here," cause I didn't even understand, like, I had no fundamental idea of how to play drums at all. And he sat me down and showed me just this, here's how you play drums. And that was a huge leap forward for me. So, and he got me into like way cooler stuff than I was listening to at all.
Do you remember like when you kind of hit your stride where, cause I've seen drummers who are fucking awful, like when they were starting off, right? But then you just see the ones that are confident where they just flow. And it's kind of a loaded question because to really go back that far. But can you remember a time where you're playing and you just go, "Holy shit, I can actually keep up," or "I'm not getting tired," or just that one thing that was such a bitch, I finally like smoothed it out?
Well, I think when I moved to Florida, I met these kids in school and went and played them. And they had this awesome practice space behind like somebody's parents' house, and they had a band and they were fine, I guess. But I remember watching, you know, there was 3 or 4 drummers and everybody would kind of take turns, and I'm watching those guys and I'm like, well, I'm not far off from these guys. And then I would play and like, man, you're pretty good. And I spent, countless hours, as a kid playing drums and just being awful. And then when I started playing with My Pal Trigger, when we started that, it just kind of clicked because we're playing, the songs were faster than anything I'd ever played before, even attempted to play.
Yeah.
And that was almost like the training wheels coming off, where I was like, oh, well, these are our songs. Like, I'm not beholden to, I'd played in bands that had written sort of originals, but it was always kind of like this, like, weird alternative metal-y kind of sounding stuff that just wasn't, I don't think it was something that I really wanted to play. And then, like I said, when I started playing with these guys, it really was kind of like the training wheels came off, and I had this ability all of a sudden to play faster songs, a little bit more complex than what I'd been used to, and I could play whatever I wanted. There was no template for me of, oh, well, these kind of songs sound like this, because I wasn't, I don't remember having an idea of like sitting around and be like, okay, our band is going to sound like this. We just kind of wrote songs. Like, I don't remember ever having that conversation.
I feel like I've been like visualizing that scene in Forrest Gump where he's running with those leg braces and they just like shatter. He starts running.
I think I actually did feel like that. Yeah.
Did you guys play when you guys formed the band? Had you both been attending local shows? Because I know you said you'd seen, concerts or things like that, or club shows. Had you guys like gone to local Florida shows prior to this?
Yeah, so like right when I was like fresh off the bus, or drove across from the East Coast, Cocoa Beach, Florida, to Tampa. I think like the first night or the second night that we were there was a couple of guys, like some like pioneers that went out like a year or two before, like this dude Rick Dean and Josh and my friend Brian Bates, and they were all like incredible musicians, like really good taste in music and stuff. And so they had pointed us kind of in the right direction. They're like, oh, there's this place, the Stone Lounge, that this woman Kim owns, and she puts on like good local shows. And so I think I just showed up with maybe me and Dorian and this kid Chris from Cocoa Beach, just kind of had no idea who was playing or what. It's not like you could go on Facebook or YouTube or find video clips and stuff, and it's like, oh, like they're indie bands, let's check it out. And just being like completely floored, and it's like, fuck, man, like I had no idea that like there was bands like this, and all the Tampa bands at the time like sounded different, but had like there was some kind of a collective sound or like presentation that was really, really cool. And so yeah, from that point, meeting those guys and becoming friends with a lot of the other guys that were playing around locally and stuff, and started playing with Jack and Thomas within a few weeks after that, I guess. And so it just seemed kind of like the logical next step was like, oh, once we have enough stuff, we should try and book a show. And I think, we booked a show before or that's how we ended up like having to come up with the name and picking the My Pal Trigger out of a TV guide. Like we had booked a show at Stone Lounge was our first show that we played. And I think that was in the winters, like in February of 95 or 90, something like that.
Yeah, February 95.
Yeah, so we played that first show or whatever, met some other bands, got like a couple of offers for other local shows in St. Pete or Clearwater or like around Tampa, and just kind of, rolled from there. But there was never like any plan or anything. It was just kind of like, opportunities would pop up just based on where we were or who we met or what we were doing. And so, yeah, we just kind of rolled with it.
Was the scene in Jersey I've mentioned this a bunch of times, Jersey was all Legion halls and churches and Elks Lodges and firehouses and things like that. Florida, I think I talked to Ian. I did an interview with Ian from Newfound Glory, and I think I asked him this question, but this was like 7 months ago, so I forget. But wasn't Florida mostly club based and not VFW hall based?
Exactly. So we had like a ton, like especially in like the Tampa area, like it was a bunch of just like pubs and like kind of like dirty bars and stuff. Stone Lounge was like a legit venue and stuff, but like like the Brass Mug like was like this little tiny place with like a crappy sound system stage, and like it was a great place. A ton of great bands have played there throughout the years, but like the carpet smells like puke, it's nasty. There's just like a bunch of like just like old townies there and stuff. And it wasn't until the only thing that I would say that we really had in Florida that paralleled what was going on in New Jersey at the time is the old schoolhouse out in Vero Beach, which was, I want to say, like, I don't know the history of it, but like late 1800 or early 1900s, like a little house on the prairie, like one room, white, A-frame schoolhouse that was sitting on a corner field lot, and you could rent it out from the city of Vero Beach for like, I don't know, $60 or $100 for the night. And so a couple of kids got together and like they were already doing like critical mass and food not bombs and like, you know, active in other ways, but they're like, oh shit, like there's, you know, no place to play here, and like we don't have shows here. Like anybody, you know, from that area had to go to Orlando or Tampa or down to Miami to see bands play. And so they just started booking shows at the schoolhouse, and it picked up momentum really quick. And so, you know, like in Tampa, like, you know, if we were lucky, there'd be like, you know, anywhere between, you know, 15 and 50 or 100 kids, like for a good show or whatever. And like you'd go out to the schoolhouse and they do these like, you know, 5 band or 10 band bills or whatever. And there'd be hundreds of kids there. And it'd be like, you know, $2 or $3 admission or free if you had no cash, and just like helped out clean up afterwards. And so that was just like you know, they paid a off-duty cop, you know, to hang outside in the car for security because that was required by the state. But yeah, so that was the only thing that we had that was similar. We didn't do the VFW Lodge or like the Lions clubs, and that was my favorite thing about New Jersey and why we gravitated like towards playing up there so much. Is like, you know, and it was largely in part due to like just like a handful of guys, like this kid Gabe that was in Humble Beginnings at the time, like, you know, was really great and hooked us up and introduced us to some nice kids. And Tom from Bigwig always was like a great host. Like we stayed with him. I think he was in Nutley, New Jersey at the time. And so every time we went up to Jersey, like we were playing like VFW halls or like Elk Lodges or like American Legions or like, you know, just a lot of spots like that. And it was the same thing. It reminded me a lot of the schoolhouse in Vero, where you just had like a shit ton of kids. And like New Jersey definitely had like, you know, like what I thought was like a definitive kind of sound at the time. Like it was a lot more, you know, faster tempo, like more aggressive, like the Bigwig kind of, or Felix Frump, you know, before that and stuff. And so, yeah, like for whatever, like you guys just had a really, you know, having, you know, we had the opportunity to travel like up and down the East Coast a bunch of times and back and forth across the country, I think twice. But like of every place we played, like, you know, not blowing smoke up anybody's ass, but like New Jersey was like onto a good thing. Like the way the scene was interconnected there, like the kids that were putting out on shows there, the consistency of the shows and just the amount of people showing up was kind of incredible.
I think just the fact that you said Humble Beginnings is, you know, especially Gabe, who went on to do, anyone listening obviously knows like Midtown and Cobra Starship and all that. But Humble Beginnings, anyone from the majority of this base listening to this podcast is from Jersey. They're probably like, fuck yeah.
Oh, right on.
Because that's like, I mean, this whole thing started with just talking about the Jersey scene, but everyone's probably like losing their shit right now.
Yeah, I ran into Gabe recently, like, because I've been up in New York City since 2001, and I don't remember where it was. Maybe like a random, like a, you know, like a bar someplace out, or like I was shooting photography for the first like decade or so I was up here. So it might have been like a fashion week event, but I ran it. I was like, Gabe? And I was like, what the fuck? Like I hadn't seen that guy in forever. And he told me about like I think he was playing in, or maybe it just started like Midtown at the time. And so, yeah, like I kind of lost touch with those guys. But yeah, I always associate like him and Josh. So it's like, you know, we played a pool party with those guys in Jersey and some shows around there. And then when they came through, like I set up a bunch of shows for them down in Florida. And I think their van crapped out at some point. Like they were camped out at an apartment when I was going to USF. They were like at my house for like a week or so. But yeah, those dudes were awesome.
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah, we played in Florida a bunch. Florida was our favorite. Sarasota was our favorite place to play because.
Where'd you guys play down there?
Actually, I was going to ask you this. So there's two things I actually want to ask. So two places I want to mention. One, the first time we were in Florida, we played the Tampa skate park.
Oh shit! Yeah. Right on.
Like we were right on. It was a Halloween party. I still have pictures from it too, and I think that's still around, actually.
Oh yeah, it's one of the better skate parks in the country.
It's an institution. Was that Brian? I forget his last name. That owns
Brian.
That place.
Yeah, I have a picture of him. He had this like bleach blonde hair and these like giant fuzzy like eyebrows as his costume or something. I don't know why.
Awesome.
Whatever this was, but it was such a cool show. And I want to remember the band we played with, but that was like our first introduction to Florida. But then we're staying there because our singer at the time, his grandparents lived in Sarasota in like kind of like an old folks like, you know, whatever complex in this big. They had like a pool and everything, which was cool for us. It was like, oh my god, you know, it's fucking March and we're swimming in a pool right now. And then we had the show in Sarasota, and it was at this. It was kind of like a pool hall, and the stage was really tall. And so we show up there not thinking anything, and we play this, and there was like a line to our table afterwards, and we're going, all right, we like Sarasota. But the best, we came back down a couple times. We actually toured with Humble Beginnings on our third third or fourth tour, and the two of us, we played at this place called the Brownstone or something Brown in Sarasota. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, we played, the only thing I can remember, and I'm not even sure if this was Sarasota or Bradenton, but it was like some Junction Pizza maybe, or like some pizza. I just remember that like gave you beer and all the pizza you could eat, and like the shows were decent, but like that's the only place I can recall. And there was like one little record shop towards like the end of My Pal Trigger, or like when Jack and I were in, the next band we did, Dakota Coastline, that we were playing down in Sarasota. But we, for whatever reason, we didn't make it down there too much. Like we played Tampa, Gainesville, Orlando, and Vero Beach a ton, but like only a handful of times made it down to Miami. Like even the same state, that was like an 8-hour drive.
Oh man, us. That was the thing I hated about Florida. We'd go over the border from Georgia, and it was like, oh, we're here. It's like, yeah, we have another 5 hours before we even get to like the middle of it. I'm like, what the fuck? This fucking state's so big.
Everybody would complain that like touring bands would never come south of like like Gainesville, and I was like, dude, it's a fucking massive like sink of resources or investment, because it's a huge U-turn. Like to get if you want to play a Miami or Fort Lauderdale show, it's you better hope kids show up, because it's like a couple, even back then, like at 98 cents a gallon for gas, like it was going to cost you to get down there and back. And so yeah, like there's always, or I remember like a lot of bands that we'd have to drive up to Atlanta to go see, because they're just like, fuck Florida and that swamp.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of it. I mean, granted, Sarasota, like that was like the, like I don't know, like the how to say this, but it was like the goal was to get to Sarasota. So anything down there we knew was kind of a gamble. Like we never played in Orlando, but like I said, we played in Tampa. We played some house show in Clearwater when we were first there, and then when we played in Sarasota, it was always packed. And that was like the show. You're on tour where you'd have like 10 real shit ones, but then there was the one where you'd make like $300, and you're like, oh wow,
yep.
Each of us can maybe get 15 or 20 bucks tonight to eat. This is exciting.
Yeah, instead of the $5 per day per diem.
Per diem. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. You guys had such a good response there. Yeah, I don't think this had played Sarasota just a handful of times, but I like, going back that many years, like memory just gets hazy and changes the shape of things. And I'm like, I remember Pizza Parlor, and free beer, but like I couldn't tell you where it was or like any of the spots that that were down there at the time.
It was small. It was this. I mean, it was so fucking hot in this place. It was like 100 kids jammed in this. It was. I don't even. It was just this like long hall. I don't even know what the fuck was in it, but it was so small. But yeah, that was like one of my favorite fucking places.
Yeah, I think that became a template for like Florida venues. There's Steve Heritage, who'd played in a really great musician and a recording engineer that was in a bunch of old Tampa bands. He opened up 403 Chaos, which was this record store that might have been, at its best, like 10 feet or 12 feet wide and like 30 feet long. And you just set up on the floor, like the band would play at the end, and he did a lot of like like hardcore and grindcore and like like indie and punk shows there, and they would just be packed. But I remember like watching bands there or playing, and like there was literally just sweat and condensation like dripping off the walls, and like the flyers were soaking wet, like the front glass was like fogged through. But yeah, there were some fucking hot venues in Florida like during the summertime.
Oh,
I remember playing with the Parasites in St. Petersburg, and like not a loft, but like an upstairs of some building, and I think it was like 110 degrees and like almost passing out there.
Jeez. Yeah, man, I remember all of this shit. It was so gross, but so great at the same time. So when you guys started playing, do you remember like your first show?
Just
you said it was in
barely.
March.
I remember the flyer. Like there's a band, The Crumbs, from South Florida. I think they might have put out something on Lookout Records like back in the days. And this dude Chuck from that band, and like it was like a photo of his with like some kid like lying underneath a police car, like some skateboarder, and I took some overweight little kid from National Enquirer made this like horrible flyer, and so I remember the flyer from the show, and I remember, that it was at Stone Lounge, but past that, like no real, like all that shit just kind of blurs together. Like I actually had to call Jack like over the last couple of weeks and be like, oh, dude, where were we? We had to like reconstruct a timeline or what was what. And so, but I don't really remember. Like there's a handful of shows like like when people went batshit crazy and like tore down that house in Wilmington. Like I totally remember that. And then the outdoor afternoon pool party that we played with like Humble Beginnings and Chooch and Bigwig and like those guys, like that was like really incredible. But we played hundreds of shows, I think, and like basically like anytime that like school was out or like I wasn't in Clayton, Thomas and I weren't in during semester, like we were on tour or playing shows for those couple of years. So unfortunately, like a ton of it just kind of blurs together at this point.
I think my buddy John, who listens to this, probably just lost his mind that you just said Chooch. He used to love that band.
Oh man,
Dude.
I loved Chooch. We met up with them on tour, and I remember going back to like their practice space. It was in this like it was a really rainy, overcast kind of town in Pennsylvania somewhere, and they had like this awesome practice space with like an Atari, and it was just cool, and it had like couches and beds. It was real big. But that band was fantastic too. Like they were such a good band.
Yeah, my friend he got their demo tape somewhere. I think it was at Flipside Records was this place in Jersey that Alan, who's the Backyard Show you guys played at, or one of those shows. I think the one you guys played with the Humble Beginnings was Alan's house in Wayne. Because he put on a show there with Less Than Jake actually played there. It was like a luau.
Wow.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, actually, and I just interviewed Vinny. Vinny's interview just aired, whatever, it launched a couple weeks ago, and I talked to him about it. He's like, "Oh, I totally remember that. That show was awesome." I'm like, holy shit, that's crazy. So when did you guys? How did the scene? What's the word I'm trying to look for here? How are you perceived in Florida, like the local scene? How did people gravitate towards your band?
I would say it was like a smash. Like Tampa had like a very kind of like a distinct sound. Like if you go back and listen to any of the old like Pogo or Mine Own America and like Hank Shaw and stuff like that, or there's a band from Georgia like 5/8 that was massive. Like everybody in Tampa and Florida loved those guys, but there was kind of like a sound or like a certain dynamic and stuff. And because there is the Pink Lincolns who were like years before us, and like those guys were ripped and were all awesome musicians, and like their shows were incredible. But even them, I was really surprised. Like I thought nationally they had like a fair amount of like fan decent following, but in Tampa like their shows weren't huge. Like they were still playing like Stone Lounge and stuff but that was there wasn't a lot of other punk bands when we started out. And so like we'd get billed with like more like slower like indie bands, or there was a lot of grindcore bands or hardcore stuff going on at the time. And so there was a lot of shows where we're kind of like, and especially like, when we started playing with Jeremy and Mike and we transitioned from like, just really straight, 4/4 fast time signature pop punk stuff to like a little bit more, when Jeremy and I started collaborating more, writing together, like it changed up the presentation a little bit. And so we're always kind of like in this gray area, or like we played with a lot of pop punk bands and those shows tended to go well, but every now and then we'd be on a bill like we're like, all right, fuck, we just need to get through this and like heads down and just get through a set kind of thing. And so at no point where they're like, oh yeah, there's like an awesome like seems like super duper support, like we had great friends in the scene and like a fair amount of support and stuff, but at no point was there like a huge like pop punk or like punk scene in Tampa like while we were playing out back then.
Did that sorry, go on.
Just across the coast in like in Vero Beach, you had like in like Flynn and Cup of Joe and Discount, and so it was really weird. And then like Gainesville had like kind of their own distinct thing with like like later on like the Less Than Jake guys and Hot Water Music, of course, and like all the bands that came out of there. But yeah, so that's why I think why we gravitated towards touring so much, and like especially like the New Jersey kind of in the like the Carolinas and Jersey shows and like all the VFW kind of house show underground stuff is like, I don't know, we found like better response, or like bands that we definitely like resonated with, or like people still to this day that Jack and I both keep touch with and stuff. Like, oh, this quality people is like when you're playing a certain kind of music or doing what you're doing, like you're putting out this, like none of us were trying to it's not like we were like, oh, like we want to get signed, or we want, like I couldn't believe that we had a van or we were playing out of state or anything like that. And you'd run into like other individuals who were kind of like on the same wavelength or the same thing, and so I was like, oh shit, like this is really cool. But we've tended to find like there's bands like like Zoinks from Reno, Nevada that we toured a bunch with, and that were like helped us out. Bob Conrad from that band was like a huge help for us. And Tim from Cat Records out in California, and then like a handful of like Jersey bands, that we really clicked with and stuff. And so, yeah, it might be a long-winded answer, but
that's the point of a podcast. Just bloat it with information. If I talk to someone, I'm like, "What do you think of that?" They're like, "It was cool." I'm like, "Fuck, now I gotta talk."
Yeah.
I mean, I do remember those earlier shows. Like I remember that first show at Stone Lounge, just because it was cool because, oh man, we booked a show, and like all our, like anybody, I think like most bands' first shows, all their friends showed up. I mean, I played a show here in Denver recently, and one of the bands on the bill was their first show, and they played first, and the place is just packed full of people. They finish, everyone leaves, and you're just kind of like, oh yeah, it's one of those first band shows. So it was awesome. Like we get there and everybody's there, and I think Tampa had a fairly supportive scene. I remember playing really great shows at Blue Chair and places like that, and in Ybor City, and the 403 Chaos across the bridge. And I remember playing across the coast at the Schoolhouse, and that place just opened my eyes to such a bigger thing. I remember being so floored because it's just like Dave said, it's this little schoolhouse and packed full of hundreds of just kids. And when I say kids, I'm talking 12 years old, little kids, and then all the way up to 20-year-old, and you'd have these all-day shows with 10 plus bands, and the show would start at 1.
Yeah,
never any problems. I never saw a fight there, and and that was such a different thing from most any other scene. You get that many people in a place and it's 100 degrees all day, someone's going to get irritated with somebody.
I can't
but
believe...
it was such an awesome community feeling where you're oh man, you really felt like part of it, and everybody had this equal share of this cool thing that I don't think I've ever seen that kind of thing anywhere else, really.
I think that's why I like Jersey. I luckily I liked it because it was so small that getting to a show would take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe 40. But just the fact that it was the local show, so this house sounds like it was very much like that, because when we played at clubs, it just had a different vibe. I don't know, it just brought a different vibe.
Yeah, this was was put on by the bands who were playing, or people who were. There wasn't a club in charge. It was just kind of hey, this is our thing. We're all going to get together. And, I can't tell you how many, benefit shows we would play there, for various different things. And it just had this really amazing sense of community. And to see a response for just a bunch of local bands seemed just crazy to me. And I know playing there with we played there with Zoinks, and I know Hot Water Music played there. I remember playing there with Weston, and even all those guys are man, I cannot believe the response here, because it's literally in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around it. You're driving through these just fields, the empty fields, and you come across this corner lot, and you're there can't be a show here. and lo and behold,
it is the best show ever.
Amazing. Yeah.
I've had a map open this whole time, because as you guys are talking, I'm literally looking at all of, just the distance between places. And I remember that Orlando was about an hour or so from Tampa, and I'm just thinking the amount of the distance that you guys would have to drive to play these shows is just fucking stupid.
Yeah, that's one of the problems of any band in Florida, especially just playing shows in your state, because if you get a Gainesville show, or God forbid you get a show in Tallahassee or Pensacola, which is super fun. Right? But even, starting out on tour was always a thing too, because you're well, the first 5 hours of this tour are just going to be in the van.
Yeah.
So, you got to drive all the way up. And like Dave mentioned, there were so many times you'd have to drive to Atlanta or Augusta or something like that just to get to see a show that you wanted to see for a band that was touring, that was I'm not going to Florida, because you're just going to go in this pigeonhole. But yeah, driving around I envy so many people that live in a place where you have this radius where you can hit all these cool towns in 30 minutes or so, because we definitely didn't have that.
Yeah. I remember one time when we were leaving, I think it was the second tour, we were in Sarasota at my buddy's grandparents, and the next day, I think we were driving to, I think we were driving to Purdue up in Indiana. Something. Yeah, exactly.
Jesus.
And this is when, I don't know why the fuck we were doing that drive. It was either that, or I know it wasn't Atlanta, because I remember we started it because that's where my girlfriend was going to college, and I'm going, this is going to be really long. And this is also the time where we had maps, physical maps, and just plotting that shit out, and just going, dude, can we stop anywhere in the middle? Just fucking play some, just that long drive was such a fucking nightmare. It was just
I remember one tour we had where we drove across the country. We were going to California, and
oh god,
there were a couple of drives through the middle of there where we're driving from like Omaha to like Denver or Omaha to Salt Lake or something like it. It was so far, and you're driving and you're like, God, this is never going to end. And you get, because even though Florida, you had that okay, we got to drive 4 hours, and once you get up to Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina, all those drives were fairly manageable affairs. But then once you cut across, when you're getting into the center of the country, and we didn't know a lot of people out there, so we would play. I remember playing a show in Omaha with the P-Tanks, and we ended up playing at this kid's house because we show up and we're like, okay, where's the show? Because we didn't have cell phones, or you just kind of showed up and you're like, okay, meet me at the corner of wherever.
Yep.
And he's like, oh well, there's another show tonight, so I didn't really flyer it, but you guys can play at my mom's house. And we were like, okay. So we literally loaded in, played for like a handful of people, and then just like hung out in this cul-de-sac for a while. And then I think that show we drove from like there to like Reno or something. Like it was an insane haul.
Jesus Christ!
But just that center of the country can be really tough.
Yeah, the East Coast was always better. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah, East Coast would work out great. Like, we'd get to like Denver and stuff and always have like fun shows there. But then, between East Coast getting out to Denver and then from there to California, or, Reno or California, there was just like these like dead zones where I don't know if there was like, cities that we were overlooking or that was off our radar at the time. But yeah, I just remember those fucking marathon treks and, some of the shows were making like $50, if we're lucky. And it's like, all right, is that enough gas to make it to where we need to go?
Yeah. That's what I was talking about.
There was like no...
No, go on.
There's like no sense of planning or like preparation. Like I don't think we ever had Jack's had this old Astro van that like his parents let us use. And I think after the first few tours, it was like so funky that they're just like, fucking keep it, man. It's yours. And like, but that had like, we got up to like 300,000 miles on that thing before that got stolen on tour. Actually, it's another story. But we always had like shitty old vans. Like we had the Astro van, the longest. I bought like a early 80s Chevy G20 that, put some work into getting going, and that caught fire on the way home from our first show on that. And then we bought like this old shitty Econoline that should have never made it out of the state, but somehow we made it around the country in that thing. You just couldn't turn the engine off once it was up to once it was up to operating temperature, or it just wouldn't start again. And so like, I'm amazed that we fucking made it any place with it was all just like, 100% enthusiasm. But as far as our logistics or planning, like it left a little bit to be desired.
This is a totally random question, but I do this all the time. There's two things I always do. Anytime I drive by a VFW hall, I'm like, even in Raleigh right now, I'm always like, man, that'd be a cool place to have a show. And then anytime I see a van, I always think, man, that'd be a cool van to tour in. Do you guys ever do that?
Oh, totally.
Yeah, well, I think especially because when we started out, we had my Astro van, and like we did several tours in that where we had 7-8 people smushed into an Astro van pulling like a little U-Haul trailer. And I'll see bands that come through now and they'll have a big like 16 passenger van, and I'm like, God, what a luxury that would have been.
Right? I'm like, God damn, that seems like it'd be so much better than the shit that we were driving back then.
No, like everything's connected. You've got fucking GPS, so you're never getting lost. Everybody's got cell phones. You can get a high roof Sprinter that you can stand up in with like bunks in the back and solar panels. Like, like Jack was mentioning earlier, everybody's off on their own bubble watching or doing whatever they want to do on, their phone. Like, yeah, I can't even imagine. Like,
oh my God.
I know, like, this sounds like very like, like rocking chair and shotgun on my porch, like as an old guy, but like I really enjoyed like the camaraderie or like the conversations or the experience. Like, like some of those drives just straight up sucked and there's no way to like romanticize them. But there was a lot of times like hanging out or driving around. Like I remember like, Jack's driving, I'm riding shotgun, and like some of the stuff we saw or like the shit that happened. And it's like, man, these are like, because you don't, like nowadays, like you don't have to pay attention to any one thing. Like everybody's got a fucking phone that's hooked up to everything. And so if you're trying to get somebody's attention or have a conversation, like in some ways you're competing against everything that exists in the history of the world. It's not just you and somebody talking.
Yeah.
And so back then, without like the interruptions of cell phones or like, we'd have to stop and find payphones to call promoters if we got lost. Like it was just a different dynamic. And so I'm not saying it's better or worse, but I think that that's kind of lost a little bit nowadays. Like when I see people traveling, or even when I spent the last couple of years just like camping and like doing the, like trucking around the country in that old camper that I had. And I noticed people were like, out in nature and doing shit, but everybody had their fucking headphones in, or there was like a more of like an individualized experience.
Yeah.
And so like not since like that, My Pal Trigger era, or like, that mid to late 90s kind of thing. Like I haven't experienced that. And, I've been doing lots of different, creative things since then. But like that was the only time that I felt like I tapped into whatever that was, or like, there was like this thing going on, or this dynamic that was, kind of unique or cool.
Yeah, I definitely felt that when, just being on the road and you'd have these long conversations and really get to know who, your band members were, who your roadie was, or, it sounds like you guys took a hell of a posse out when you went on the road. Like we would just be the four of us and a roadie typically. But did you guys?
Yeah, it wasn't our hype man or anything like that. Our cheerleaders, we had
they just run around stage
no
with just like white towels.
Exactly.
Right.
Jack insisted on bringing his water bottle guy, and it's like, all right, dude, if you have to, like. But no, like we didn't have enough money, and so like when we toured with In Like Flynn, I'm like, okay, you guys are 3-piece, we're a 3-piece. We just need somebody to help with like a merch table and dry. It's 3 plus 1 is 7. We got 7 seats. Instruments won't fit. Well, fuck, we'll get a U-Haul trailer and overload that thing. And so we'd put 2 bands in the van, and the same thing, like discount at some point. They splurged and bought like, I don't know, a $3,000 van, which seemed like a crazy luxury. It was like a nicer, like blue Econoline. And so they were kind enough, like, when our Astra van was dying, like we hopped in with them and did like a, US tour. And so it wasn't like it was a ton of people with My Pal Trigger. We just did a lot of like ride sharing with other bands.
That's super smart. We never did that. Even when we toured with Humble, we both had separate vans. Like sometimes like members from the band would go and hang with the other van for like the long drive or something like that. But we never all crammed in. That's really smart. Do you remember Wesley Willis? Yeah. Actually, I just had to. It just popped in my head, and Jack will get back to you. But do you remember Wesley Willis?
Polaroid. See what develops. Of course, I remember Wesley Willis. He was the best.
I heard that because he couldn't drive, so if you went on tour with him, the part of it was he had to go in your van, but he would pay for it. Did you ever hear this?
I did. No. I saw him play. I think I was with one of Jack's friends at the time, Holly. We saw Wesley Willis did a show in Tampa, Florida, and like I remember he had a huge fucking welt on his head from headbutting everybody. Like just a big, and he like headbutted the shit out of this girl, Holly, and he was like, "We are friends," bam. But he had like a shit ton of artwork that he was like reasonably priced, kind of cool, like cityscape artwork. But and he had like like a very minimal like whatever his Casio synth setup. But yeah, I didn't see if he had one guy helping him out with sound or kind of keeping things on point. But I didn't know if he was with the other band or touring on his own. But yeah, it was an incredible show.
I heard that he couldn't drive because he was on so many meds or something. And
sure.
I think that was kind of one of those things where we heard about that, and I thought in my head, I'm like, well, fuck, if he's like gonna pay for that, maybe like, and I think he was like paying some part, it was like $50 a day, or the band would get compensated somehow. And I remember thinking, or even talking to my drummer Sean, being like, maybe we should do that. Maybe we should like try to get with this guy, because it sounds like we can like make some money, or we can actually have some guarantee of having gas money. But then I heard about how he was on so many meds, and like he was like bipolar, or like just super fucking bipolar, and it was just kind of a gamble of what you were going to get. And I was like, yeah, fuck that shit. We're not doing that.
Yeah, we just had, it was
very
just like
strange.
Yeah. So I don't what you said reminded me of that, and I just had to kind of stick that in there. But Jack, I totally cut you off. What were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was going to say, with the sharing vans thing, there was a discount tour in their van where we had their van with a loft, no trailer, so all the equipment went under the loft. The only way to drive down the road was you had 2 people up front, 2 people on the captain's chairs in the middle, 1 person in between them sitting on either laying on the floor or sitting on like a cooler, and then you had to have 2 people laying down on top of the loft in the back.
Yep.
And we did the whole tour that way.
But by loft, it wasn't like a bed. It was like 14 inches of clearance. Like you slid in like a coffin.
Yep.
Like you couldn't roll over. It was hideous.
Yeah, I remember seeing those all the time. I'm like, Jesus Christ. But for some reason, we thought it was like, yeah, that's normal. I'll sit up here for 14 fucking hours lying down and just be like, if this thing ever hits anything, I'll just be a fucking torpedo going through the windshield.
Exactly. And it's like such a common theme or a narrative, like when you talk with any bands that have spent like any amount of time like in a shitty old van on the road, and like at a certain point, like, you know, like people get frustrated or like there's issues and shit. I was like, man, I wonder how much is just differences between people and how much is like this fucked up like psychological experiment of putting like, you know, 6 dudes or 5 dudes in 48 square feet of space that smells like shit, you know, with the lack of resource, and be like, all right, let's see how this goes for 30 days or 60 days. Like,
and it was,
you know,
it was always the worst too, because when the moment you realized it smelled like shit was about a couple days after, when let's say you got a hotel room and you'd be in someone's house, and then you go out to the van to get something and you open the door and this like stale ball sweat whatever would just hit you in the face, and you're like, oh Jesus Christ. But once you were in it, you kind of like became accustomed to it. But then
which is scary as shit in its own right. And it's weird, man. Like other people in other bands, you're like, oh, that smell. But like, I just remember like every now and then you'd meet somebody and they're like, oh, can we travel to the next town and like do merch? I'm like, yeah, sure. And you open up the door and they're like, what the fuck? Like, do you guys have a corpse? And I'm like, no corpses, man. We're sorry. We just load out at 10, get in the car at 10:30 and start driving. Like, you know, no showers or hotels or green rooms here.
Yeah, we're all eating like super shitty food because that's all we can afford. So there you go. So we're sweating out.
Yep.
Did you guys how many albums did you guys actually put out? Because I only see 2, and I thought there was only 2, but I could be missing some.
Yeah, we just did the 2 CDs, like one with Bob Conrad on Second Guess, and the Lessons in Ancient History that we put out on Cat Records. And then other than that, we did like a handful, like maybe 4, 5, 7 inches, I think, as well. So we did like a split with Discount, a split with Neurotic. There's a couple.
There's the first one with the just one of those days ones, and there was the 2 Miles from Nowhere, and
the Riverview Mentality.
Yeah, that one.
Did you guys?
So 5, 7 inches, 2 CDs.
What did you have with you, like when you went on your first tour? I'm kind of like jumped way forward and jumped back a little bit, but did you guys go out with the 7 inches first, or did you like what did you take with you? Oh God.
So Jack and I were talking about that last night, like you know, so trying to make sure Skype worked and shit. My old man ass could figure out my phone and computer because I'd never used Skype before. But as we were like talking, and I realized, I was like, shit, man, like one of the consistent themes or narratives for My Pale Trigger, and it's like, you know, call it poor planning or like lack of knowledge of how the industry works, but every single time, you know, so Thomas and I were in school full time, and like Jack as well, so like we would kind of, you know, like just tour like when school wasn't and such. So we'd have summer tours or like over breaks and stuff like that. So we'd all, you know, we'd record, we'd send stuff off to a pressing plant or to the label, whoever we were working with at the time, you know, and they're like, okay, cool, you'll have these back by May 1st. And I'm like, cool. So we'll err on the side of caution and we'll start our tour on June 1st or June 15th. So we'd always factor in an extra month or so in case something went wrong. But like consistently and without fail, we never, ever, ever had a 7-inch or CD on tour that we were supporting. So we're always just like waiting for the fucking postman or UPS. The shit didn't show up. We jump in a, you know, or the night before, I'm like, fuck, we have nothing to sell. So Jack and I would stay up and screen print T-shirts, you know, or make more shirts or whatever. And so it made it really difficult from a merch perspective. So like, you know, we had at a certain point, you know, we had like 1 or 2 7-inches with us, but people were like, dude, like, where's the new CD? Where's the new CD? And so we'd always, you know, get back from tour and there'd be like a fucking box from UPS on the doorstep with the CDs waiting for us. And so for There's Hope and No Tomorrow and then Lessons in Ancient History, we did like complete US tours without having the merch to sell. And that made it kind of tough.
Did you try to get it like shipped out to you at like to someone's house to just kind of catch it midway?
It arrived like, you know, within a day. You know, we'd be heading back towards Florida, like within, you know, always within like a day or a week after we got back. It's not like it was sitting in a box in Florida. Like it just missed the boat by a month, sometimes 2 months.
Yeah.
And so, I just didn't realize, you know, as far as like with pressing plants or like their order of operate, you know, like sometimes just shit gets pushed back depending on their workload. And so we were like historically and consistently like always kind of screwing ourselves. Like we were like, well, we already committed to this tour. Like we can't cancel the shows and stuff. Like people put all this energy into setting them up. There's other events, you know, planning. And so, I remember at one time, like we were just like fucked out broke. And I remember like whatever money I had open on a credit card, like I used that to get the van just so it would like pass inspection or give us a chance to get out of the state. And me and Jeremy both had like, I don't know, $3 or $5 cash to our name. And I'm like, well, first show's in Georgia, and that's like, 8 hours away. And if we get our $5, that's enough for like bagels and like whatever. And then like, all right, fuck it, man, we're going to make this work. And we made it for 30 days and made it back to Florida. But yeah, I'm kind of amazed. Like old man me looking back now is like, dude, that was fucking a disaster waiting to happen. And so we always made it back, like not in one piece. Like another common thing with our tours is somebody always got deathly ill. So like the big tour that we did with Discount out to California, I think by the time we got to San Francisco, like Allison from Discount and myself both had strep throat or walking pneumonia. And so somebody was coughing up blood in San Diego, and we just beelined it home, like canceled the shows and drove straight back to Florida. Another time we were on tour, like made it up to New York, and we were playing a radio show on, I think it was WNYU is the station, and I just like started coughing while we were playing, and like looked down at my hand and was like coughing up blood. And I'm
Jesus.
like, kind of have to stop. And like got home to Florida like 24 hours later, go to the doctor, and like I remember like the X-rays, like, dude, your fucking lungs are filled with fluid. You have pneumonia. Like you fucking need to get in bed and take antibiotics. And so yeah, like it was like, lack of prep, never having CDs or merch, and then like my shit immune system, or Allison as well was always sick. One time, Jack, we were with fucking James from Fun Size, and like we went to some reservoir in Midlothian, Virginia, where they had this sketchy somebody fucking took an old rusty pipe and cut it like haphazard with a hacksaw. So it was all jagged on the edges, and it was like a rope swing that was like 100 feet in the air, and you had to clear like 100 yards of like cliff before you made it to the water. And we're like, oh, this seems like a good fucking idea. And so Jack went first and made it about 90 yards and like slipped off and was like going down Tarzan style. And long story a little shorter, just ripped like this sushi looking piece of flesh off of his palm, like all the skin off of his palm. God. And that was the second day or third day into tour. And so we went to like a military hospital or something, like, Jack's father or whatever, like pointed us in the right direction, and like they treated it as like a burn. There was nothing they could do. He was just missing his palm. And I remember when the rope swing came back up, James from Discount caught the stick, and like as he caught it, like Jack's skin unraveled and hung down. He's like, "Is that a fish?" And I look and I'm like, "Nah, dude, there's fucking fake palm prints. That's like his lifeline. That's Jack's hands." And like so. For the rest of that tour, I think, or at least the first few nights, we just took duct tape and like Monster or Animal from the Muppets. We just taped a drumstick to that hand and like played every night until he started bleeding.
Oh my God.
We always had like, not like a woe is me kind of thing. Like it was interesting as fuck and always challenging, but I don't think we ever had a tour go as planned. I don't think we ever finished a tour. And normally on the way home, like, so yeah, we've gotten super sick, like lungs full of fluid, coughing up blood, like Allison and I, like on our deathbeds. And then one of the tours we did within like Flynn, like we had 3 shows left to go. We were on our way home playing in Augusta, Georgia. This dude, Crazy Johnny, put on the show. And I remember we parked or whatever, and it wasn't the best neighborhood, but it wasn't horrible. And like we found a space in front of a fucking church underneath a street light. And Jack's like, dude, I don't know, man. I don't feel good about this. And to this day, I'm like, and I feel so bad, but I was like, Jack, man, not everything's like Bloomingdale, Florida, man. Like this is totally fine. We're in front of a church. Like just relax. Let's have fun. And so he's like, I don't know, man. I'm just going on record saying I got a bad feeling. And so fast forward 12 hours the next morning and like walk out to go get our toothbrush and shit out of the van. And there's just a pile of glass under the street light. And I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding me. So we had like our, all our backpacks, clothes, like, all of our instruments, everything was in the van. And so it was just us and in like Flynn standing on the side of the road in Augusta, Georgia, like broke as fuck. And so I had a credit card and we got to the airport and I rented a Nissan Sentra, I think is all we could afford, like a 4-seater, and 7 of us piled into that and drove back to Florida. And so when we got home, we had no van, no instrument. We were like the world's worst a cappella band. We were like totally tapped out, like no instruments, no van, no nothing, and kind of had to rebuild from there. And so, yeah,
and I think in like Flynn had like $600 or $800 or whatever they made on that tour, or whatever their combined money was, like hidden in like the wheel well behind in the back seat. And so like everything was just in the blink of an eye. Like I remember them waking me up and being like, Jack, what'd you do with the van? I'm like, that's not funny. I don't know what you guys are talking about. And like, no, seriously, where's the van? I'm like, shut up, it's not funny. And you just go outside and you're like, man, I was furious.
Oh my God.
You're also like comically defeated, because I remember that drive back ragging out this Nissan Sentra. We were giddy the entire time. Like it was just, there was nothing you could do but just laugh about this situation. And it was one of the funniest drives, like driving back and just giggling about this, knowing full well you're like, everything that I own on planet Earth is in that van.
Yeah.
Like all our instruments and like every tape or CD I owned, all my clothes. And yeah, it was hilarious. So
I can remember that, man. I can remember that feeling of just being, I mean, how old were you guys at this point?
oh man, that was our first tour, I think. So I was 18.
That was the first
Yes.
fucking tour when that happened?
Yeah, and
Yep.
then like 2 weeks later, because I get home and my dad was in the military, and I told my dad about it because the guy that came out that did that took the cop that came out and took our statements, like, yeah, because it's just a bunch of like dirty punk rock kids, and he's like, yeah, I wouldn't count on you ever seeing that van again. And we're like, well, are you gonna look for it? And he's like, no, probably not. And we're like, fuck it, let's just go home. And like we get back, and a couple weeks later, we finally get a phone call from somebody my dad knew in like the National Guard there, like knew somebody, and then somehow they found it in front of like a crack house or something.
No
And
way.
so this is like 2 weeks later. So Dave and I drive up there, and it's on like a Saturday or a Sunday, and they're like, well, the guy who does the impound stuff, because all our stuff, they found the money or did all this crap, and like everything that was in the van, they like put into evidence or whatever. So they had to have this guy come out on like a Saturday, so he's super pissed, and I get all the stuff, and the police station or whoever in Augusta, Georgia, had done repairs, I guess, and I'm air quoting that, because they'd broken like the
whole steering column.
whole steering column, and so they fixed it, but you could move it around in a circle in your hands. Like it was not, they put it in like upside down. Anyway, I drove all the way back. So we get there, and there's my van with our trailer, and never in a million years would I have expected to get any of our stuff back. So we get there, and we look at the trailer, and the padlock's still on the trailer, and I'm like, that's not possible. Crack the padlock open it up. All our stuff is still in the trailer. So these guys had stolen it, had never bothered to open the trailer or never got that far, because they took like all my CDs and tapes, like that was gone, and like all the like change in like a cup holder, and like I remember there was a half gallon of milk that was on the dashboard sitting in the Georgia sun for 2 weeks.
Oh god.
So the van was just rancid. But we got all our shit back. I drove all the way home, and we called the guys and like, hey man, we got all of our stuff back. You're never gonna believe this.
That's fucking insane.
Because I've known so many bands that have had their stuff stolen, and I rarely have I ever heard anybody getting their shit back.
I've never heard of anybody getting their shit back.
It
That's
was
wild.
nuts. Yeah, because I mean, 2 weeks later, and they just never stole it, either disappeared or never bothered to open the trailer for whatever reason. So
I literally had a note here in my questions to be like, do you have any crazy tour stories? And I'm like, god damn, that's like all you guys had.
And that was our first tour, so I'm like, oh well, all the tours are going to be just like this.
Yeah, so like all the other catastrophes, whether it was like strep throat or walking pneumonia, it's like, fuck man, like this is all uphill from like where we started off, where it's like, dude, things are getting better all the time. Like,
Did you ever actually
still...
say that out loud on tour, where like when some shit was going down, you're like, well, we did get the fucking van stolen one time, and that was the worst?
Absolutely, we did. I mean, we were in Denver one time, and the tour kind of collapsed, and our last few shows kind of got canceled. So, we had like $20 between like 4 people or 5 people, or whatever it was. And we're driving down. We're like, okay, we're in Denver. The tour's over. So we're driving home, and we stop in this like, it's like a nature preserve in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma,
City.
Yep.
And they had this beautiful waterfall and this like really nice like lagoon, and we're swimming and having a great time. We spent our last money on like peanut butter and jelly. We didn't have sleeping bags or any of that stuff. So we're sleeping like, we got a space for like $5, and we're sleeping on the ground. And for some reason we had this really dumb idea, because there was a rope hanging from the tree. We were like, oh, well, clearly we're supposed to bag up our stuff and tie the bread and peanut butter in this bag. Our van's right there. We could have just left it in the van. But we're just like, we're camping, so why not? And then we wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and some creature has wrapped the rope around a tree and is just destroying the last of our bread, and we all kind of wake up in this terror panic. And it's, like a huge couple of raccoons, and they ate all the last of our bread. So all we had was like $3 or $4 left, and a jar of peanut butter. And we're all just totally defeated, and we're like, just go home, man. I'm done.
I think my favorite part about that story is just listening to David laugh in the background, just for remembering this shit.
Dude, it was just honestly, a fucking locked Astrovan glass windows, put it, it's a pretty fucking bear-proof container or whatever. And I don't know why. It was just we were so just down and out and trying to make the best of it. And the waterfall was I had to ask Jack, I was like, dude, did that place in Oklahoma exist, or did I dream that in some fucking fatigue induced hallucination? But I remember pulling up in this beautiful blue lagoon. It was just us there, and camping that night. Oh, we got to tie our shit to the trees. We're camping. And then that realization, we're is that a bear? Okay, it's a raccoon. Oh fuck, dude, we have no more food, and we're 1,000 miles from home. How do we get home with no food? We thought we were being thrifty, buying just peanut butter and jelly. It's okay, no luxuries, let's just make it last. And I was fuck, man, this really, really sucks. And so
you guys are resilient motherfuckers, man.
Yeah, we just limped home from that one.
Yeah, it was such a weird thing. We would always have these pretty good tours and fun tours and stuff, but always the last couple of shows we always had an issue. We were on tour with Discount. We're all the way out in California. We play our last show in San Diego, and we had a few shows booked on the way home. One of them, the next one I think was from San Diego, was in Phoenix, and we were supposed to play with this band Mandingo. And we're on the way, and somehow news gets to us when we get there that somebody from the band was got arrested at Disneyland or something. So the show's off. And it's the middle of summer. It's the beginning. It's the beginning of July, because we're in Phoenix. It's 110 degrees outside. We're from Florida, and I'm I can't take this. It was way hotter than anything I'd ever experienced. And this is the tour where there's 8 of us in one van, and no AC, none of that. And so we went and saw Independence Day was coming out, and this is pre-internet, so everyone's oh man, there's this awesome new sci-fi movie coming out. It's going to be so good. Aliens. It's going to be awesome. So we all pack into this theater, mostly because it had AC, and we watched this garbage movie. And everybody just walks out. We're all disappointed. We're oh, that was terrible.
Oh.
But then we had another show in Texas that fell through, and then I think another one in New Orleans. So we were well, we're going home now. So we start driving. It's 110 degrees. We've got the side of the van door, sliding door open the whole time pretty much. And we would stop at hotels, and everybody would jump out, jump in the water, jump back out, get in the van and leave. And we're all just riding with our shirts off, and we had a cooler, and we would dunk towels of ice in the ice water. And it was the most miserable drive home, because you're driving through Texas. I remember falling asleep in Texas and waking up, and I'm where are we? And they're Texas.
Yeah, that's state goes for days.
14
no matter
fucking
how fast
hours.
you drive.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a 14-hour fucking drive across one state on Route 10.
Yeah, and not having a show. You're just well, we're at some point we will get home. But yeah, it was just funny because up until that point, tour was, it was pretty fun. We were having a good time, and then the last little run that happened to be the entire length of the country, we just didn't have any shows, so we just drove straight home.
I would like to challenge, though, the fact that you think that Independence Day was bad. I like that movie, my friend.
I think I over time I have come to appreciate it, because I know I've softened my stance on a lot of what's good and what's bad. I think I appreciate things more now than I did it when back then. I was at that moment I was just too cool for that movie. I was this is garbage. And I think some of that too was also because we were all just defeated. It was hot as shit outside, and I just, aside from that being the greatest movie I've ever seen, there was no way I was going to like that movie.
Yeah, that thing was just a punching bag. It could have been absolutely incredible, but everybody was just so disheartened and sick and broke, and the prospect of going dude, if we go 80 miles an hour, which the van can, a 65 if we're lucky, for 3 days just stopping for piss is just to get home and just to be broke again and figure out if we can get our old jobs back or what the fuck we're gonna do. And so yeah, that movie took the brunt of it. But
that's actually funny, because that actually did you guys this is going somewhere, but did you guys see that movie? Was it on when it came out, or was it months after it came out?
Oh
It
no,
was like the
this-
day that
this
it
was
came
opening
out.
Weekend.
Okay, so it's weird because I'm putting myself in a timeline where I remember going to that with my buddies to see that in Jefferson. This is before I think we were in a band, but it's before we even toured. So it's just wild to know at that point in time, like you guys are out on the road doing this, and I'm in a movie theater at this time, like working at like Sears, hating my fucking life, but like wanting to tour and thinking that like I don't know. There's something about that for me. It's pretty cool to hear that because like you guys are in the middle of fucking America doing this thing that I eventually was like I really want to do this. And I remember when that I saw pictures that Alan had of you guys playing with Discount in his backyard, and then Less Than Jake. Those are the moments. I mean, I remember that those photos told like kind of opened my eyes to going shit. We can do this. So it's just crazy to me because you guys like literally seeing those photos were one of the main reasons why I was like I want to tour.
Oh, dude, that's
man.
awesome.
Yeah, like seeing that, I'm going, wait, so these guys are from Florida. They're playing in a pool with this other band from Florida, and it's like this local show in someone's backyard. I was like, fuck, I want to do that shit. Like, I remember specifically seeing that, so that's just crazy to me. Wow.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think that's
those
what was-
were my favorite shows too. Is playing like cool stuff like that and playing, birthday parties and pool parties was almost more fun a lot of the time than just showing up at some random club.
And I think back then too, like I would say like 80 or 90% of the shows that we played, there was no stage. Like you're playing on the floor to the audience. And so like nowadays, like it has to be a band that I really, really like to like go out and see a show. Like, because like even like bands that were playing to 100 kids back then, like they're doing their reunion shows now, and it's like 5,000 people in New York and overpriced tickets.
Yeah.
But the difference between seeing Jawbreaker play at like Hardback Cafe, like in Hardback Cafe in Gainesville with like 100 kids versus 5,000 people at like Brooklyn Steel. It's like a very different kind of experience.
Wait,
And
did you see them play there?
Yeah, I went with James and Allison from Discount, like back on, it was their last tour, like when they were touring to support Dear You, that I remember, like that was one of the shows, like highlights of my life. It was like sitting on the stage monitors with James, like chowing down on really cheap cheese pizza, watching Jawbreaker just kill it.
Wow.
But
Dude.
yeah, back then, like when you guys were playing it and we were like, that was like, so like the last thing in my life that I've come across, like I was like, oh fuck man, this is accessible. Or like other kids watching it was like, there wasn't like that apprehension. Like a lot of kids were like, man, I can do this, or I can be involved in it. And I think to me, like more so than the music or like the chance of like any kind of fame or success was like, without sounding like too cliche or cheesy, it was like that like genuine sense of community or like people helping each other out. Like we noticed a shift towards like the end of My Pal Trigger. Like, I remember like Discount was from day one like a really great talented band, and so like they had like a fair amount of label interest. And I remember at certain points like them getting like different offers or people wanting to talk to them and stuff, and like it was almost comical to those kids. They're like, why would we want to talk to you guys? Like we're just doing our thing, or like we already have all this stuff, or like we don't, it wasn't a conversation that they were interested in and stuff. And so the fact that like with like this kind of scene stuff, like you could kind of take control of your own destiny, or like you would book shows for other bands from out of state. So, from Jersey, when they came to Florida, we took them up with shows knowing that when we got to Jersey, they would do the same in return. So it was like this very like symbiotic kind of thing. And then like, towards like the last year or two of our band, there was like a handful of bands that started getting, like it was like Jade Tree and what was it, Doghouse, and some of those labels started kind of coming about and getting more
Big
popular.
Wheel,
and yeah, exactly. And bands became a little bit more accessible. There was a handful of bands that started like making the jump to, like major labels and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like we've never seen, I haven't seen this before, like at least with our friends' bands and stuff. And then you fast forward like, a decade or two, and I'm living in New York City now. And like, when Jack and I were playing out in the last band we were in, the New Red, like playing around New York City, like every band we played with had like, a manager or a PR dude, or like the goal was to get a showcase or like, do a residency someplace so you could get signed. And like, so there was no like putting in your time or your dues or like, like playing in a community. It was just like, I don't know, everybody just trying to get to that number one spot or trying to get recognition or trying to, whatever that goal was. And I still, like I said, I could be waxing nostalgic or painting with like a really happy, colored brush. But when I look back at that period of time and like the true amount of like group cooperation and people willing to like help out strangers, it was kind of a unique thing. And I always wonder, like, did the world change or did I change? Like maybe that scene or that community still exists out there someplace and I'm just old and lame and not tapped into it anymore. But I don't know. I think to some extent like that it was kind of unique, and the kids that were tapped into that are a part of it. That's why, there's an interest in like, your podcast or Drew's website or like, people documenting this stuff now. Like there was, a lot of people still like, oh, that was awesome. I felt a connection, or like, oh, I really related to that.
Yeah, no, I think, no, I totally agree. I think once 2001, 2002 came around, all of a sudden it turned into this business, and we've talked about this like a bunch of different episodes, but there was just a different vibe where bands would walk in and they almost were kind of just too big or too cool, and they'd have their manager with them, and everyone had like the keys hooked on their belts, on their belt loop, and like it always looked like they were doing something important all the time. I'm like, all right, what the fuck is this bullshit show that's getting put on right now?
Yeah, like right along those lines, when I was shooting so when I was touring with Jack and doing my Pop Trigger stuff, I'd also started to getting into photography. So I was shooting like Discount and Avail and like Jimmy Eat World and Breed and like different bands that that I really liked, that we were into, and eventually sold some of those or got some stuff public and kept on shooting and stuff. But fuck, my brain just turned off. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Never mind.
I'll just keep that in. He'll be like, "Oh my, he stroked out in the middle of the interview."
Yeah, what happened? It's like, oh, Dave just had a stroke.
It's kind of going in the direction of just what like the popularity show that was getting put on. Like when you were doing the photography, did you just start to see, like, I don't know, maybe there was something in that where you're saying like you'd see photos and just start seeing a difference, or like interacting with bands was different when you were doing that?
Yeah, like so exactly. So the band interactions and stuff, and like it was more like like a hobby thing, and like bands were, I don't know, like I don't want to say motivations were different. I'm sure there's tons of artists out there that are still like creating awesome stuff because they generally enjoy doing it. But yeah, there was a certain shift in like mindfulness or like motivation, or I think in terms of like we were saying, like when when I first moved to Tampa, and I'm like, oh fuck, that's possible. Like watching like Chester or My Own America or a Pogo play on stage, and I'm like, fuck man, if I try really hard or put in some time, maybe I could do that. But like nowadays, like I don't know, like the dynamic or the focus has changed a little bit. Like I think that we're a little bit more self-absorbed and a little bit like like me or whatever it is. So like like the goals are whatever that part of the scene or that infrastructure that was in place that used to nurture this kind of like growing or like community, it's kind of slipped away, or we've lost that in the the race towards bigger and better, or like as new technologies come out. Like I remember like you'd hear about a band, like I remember J Church was a band that Allison at Discount introduced me to, like when we first met, and I was like, fuck man, these guys are awesome, and they just had like a couple of 7-inches, but we knew they had a ton of 7-inches, but like nobody knew how many or what the names of all of them were. And we'd go from like record store to record store on tour across the country, like racing each other to the J section in the record bins, like trying to find like Jawbreaker, Jawbox, J Church, like whatever.
Yeah.
And so like it was years before I had any idea of how much stuff like Lance Hunt had written or put out, and like I had no idea what they looked like or anything. And then I heard they were playing in Atlanta, Georgia. So like me and my friend Yvette like hopped in my truck and drove up there, and I'm like, holy shit, like they're just like this 3-piece dude, and they're kind of like Discount, like this 3-piece band or whatever, and they played on the floor, and like Lance is fucking awesome, and just like totally. But there was this like several year process of like discovery or like learning about their music, or like slowly kind of getting to know the band better. And now as we're having this conversation, I could reference a band and you can pull it up on Google, and within 2 seconds everything about them. And even if they're like incredible or have done some noteworthy things, like you kind of just consume it and shit it out and move on to the next thing because it's easy and quick, and like we take in information differently nowadays. And so yeah, like for me, the importance of like, I don't know, that scene back then, or the sense of discovery, or like hearing about Bigwig and then going to see them play and being like, holy fuck, these guys are awesome. Like,
yeah,
it wasn't like, when I say Bigwig, and I can just type into YouTube and I can, just watch a, horrible audio quality live show that some kid took from the audience from his iPhone while he should have been paying attention to the show. And it's like, oh, that's not representative of the band. And so, yeah, it makes me feel a little bit old, or like I said, the old guy in a rocking chair saying like, oh, it's better in the old days. But
you know though that some guys that people were saying the same shit about when we were doing what we did. They're like, oh, these guys have vans, or they have there's a label putting this out. Like, we didn't have this shit. Or I mean, I can imagine looking at NoFX when they put out 10 Years of Fucking Up, that first I keep saying DVD, was a VHS, where they documented that leading right up before Punk and Drublic came out, and it's them playing in like this dirt field in like the 80s where no one even knew what this shit was. So I think there's always those gaps, but I think what I totally get what you're saying, because back then when you like, you're saying you want to go get J Church and being like, hey, there's a record store 30 minutes away or whatever. Let's just drive there and go see if they have anything with no guarantee to just see like what other records they have. So there's the time in the car with your friends talking to them. You're not, and no one's looking at a phone because they didn't exist back then, like these iPhones.
Yeah.
These iPhones these kids have. Then you get there and it's like you're in more in the moment. Like you said, you're more mindful and you're living in that present time doing that shit. And it's so exciting. And you're getting the 7-inch, but you're like really reading it and you're looking to see if there's a photo of these bands. Like, what do they look like? Like, what are they like? But now you can go online, like you said, and see that, watch a video, and you're like, oh, cool. You're like, next, and just constant.
Yeah.
And I think too, back then, and I don't mean to sound rude, back then, but I feel like, at least for me, like you'd spend more time with that 7-inch that you had, because that might be all you had.
Yeah, exactly.
You like, now I can go online and I can go, okay, now I've got their whole discography at the click of a button. Back then you're like, okay, I have this 7-inch and this 7-inch. I know more of this band exists, but these are the only ones I have to listen to now.
Yep.
Like, I have to go find that other stuff. So you'd spend more time with it. I mean, I
You'd be more attached to it.
7-inches and things. Yeah, where you listen to it over and over and over. Whereas now you're just like, I can burn through somebody's discography in a few hours and then just be past it.
Oh, I remember that when torrents or like LimeWire and stuff, right? I mean, I would download an entire discography and just burn through it, and I didn't even appreciate it. I was like, wait, I could do this all the time. I wouldn't listen to the whole record, and some records aren't perfect all the way through. But like you said, yeah, you'd have that one record, and if it was really good, I mean, I remember getting, I think Clarity, or no, my buddy got Lucky Denverman. It was the 5-song EP before Clarity came out that Jimmy Eat World put out, and had like Lucky Denverman on it, and then 2 songs from Clarity and the 2 songs that weren't on Clarity. I remember just like listening to that thing over and over and over again at my buddy's house.
Absolutely.
That's awesome you referenced that, because that Jimmy Eat World record and then the Flaming Lips Soft Bulletin were the 2 like semi-recent records that I can think of where I was like, fuck man, start to finish, like I can just play this on loop and like the songs are just fucking awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, even after that, I think it was a Clarity or whatever the record before Bleed American, but like that as well. I was like,
Clarity was
man,
before Bleed American.
Yeah, brilliant record and like really good all the way through. But yeah, like nowadays we kind of, because you can have everything at once, like nothing really means much of anything. And or at least I find it's something that I kind of have to struggle with or try and stay mindful of.
Oh yeah, I totally get that. I mean, I noticed that every time I open up Instagram, I'm just like next. And I had, like yesterday, I left my phone home and went out to this like bottle shop up here. It's got like a bar. I just sat there because my phone died, and so I left it charging. I went out and I just brought like a pen and paper and sat there and just kind of doodled. And I was like, my God, I feel more grounded right now. Like,
yeah, but it's also weird how foreign it feels sometimes. Like, I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't have a phone with me. Like, yeah. And say, like, yeah, the tools and the technology are awesome, but I feel like, I don't know, I kind of have this, like, running theory that people, myself included, will be as lazy as technology permits them to be. And so It's not like we rise to the occasion. Like, I have access to all the information, like, or the cumulative knowledge of mankind in my hand on this iPhone, so I can learn about anything. It's like people posting pictures of themselves or clicking like, or, like fart icons or whatever it happens to be. It's like, oh, that's what we do with these technologies. And so, yeah, I felt like I used to use Instagram for like my business and work stuff. And like something happened like a few months ago. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of the same thing and it doesn't really mean anything. And like the pace at which this information is coming at me is so fast that I don't even know what to make of it anymore. But I do know that it devalues any one individual thing. And so I was like, fuck, man, how does anybody make an impact or get like a meaningful message out nowadays when the signal to noise ratio is as crazy as it is?
Yeah, it's hard, man. But I mean, I think, just kind of taking that, because I've got this podcast and I definitely want to jump into, we're going to 2 hours. I've really got to,
oh shit!
Wrap this up.
Change, segue to whatever.
No, but I mean, I have the Instagram for this podcast. I have a comic that I do, and then I have my old band. I just started doing that Instagram over the summer. That one's really fun. That one's hilarious to fuck with and just like post random shit that I find. I've got and I like my animation company, so I have like 4 accounts that I'm constantly jumping back and forth between. And I'm putting stuff up there and I'm going back and forth to see that there's an engagement. But I have a lot of fun with this one because the audience that's listening to it are, like you said, you got stuck in kind of like a hole, like a black hole of just listening to episodes. It's like the fact that not like I planned it, but the fact that people are giving that much time to this topic, I think that's the difference, right? It's like, what do you really love? And then are you going to give hours of your time to it and just be in there in a moment for a long period of time? And that's why I love doing this when I putting stuff up on Instagram, because it's fun to just show clips and things like that, but I get to engage with people like genuinely. Where in a business, you're engaging just to get like likes and, you know, to beat the algorithm to get
yeah, that's why I
more people
was so
to see
stoked to like see what you were doing, or that, you know, you're kind enough to like reach out to us. Like I can, you know, not being like, oh, my time is valuable, but like you can accomplish a lot of stuff if you put your mind to it in 6 hours. But like, you know, emailing you or like finding out about the podcast and then just staying up all night and listening to 5.5 hours of interviews with like old friends and stuff. And like, it wasn't, like I said, I'm trying to be pretty deliberate with my time these days, where I'm like, oh fuck, I'm old, I need my sleep. But I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. And then bookmark, you know, to go back through. And so I think it is cool, like, you know, to see like, you know, like I said, you and Drew and a handful of kids that are doing like, you know, like Instagram feed, like posting all the old show flyers and stuff from back in the day. And so like I hadn't seen much activity or, you know, anybody really documenting this stuff up until the last couple of years. So yeah, it's kind of neat to see the response, even if it's like on a small individualistic level. Like it's not reaching hundreds of thousands of people, but to the individuals that reach out, it's like, oh fuck, man, like that's kind of cool. That was like a meaningful, like a shared meaningful experience for, you know, those people as well that we met or knew at the time. And like, you know, everybody's too cool for school nowadays. And so like that kind of sincerity or like actual connection, I think there's a lot of value in that, or people kind of remembering or exploring that.
Yeah, I mean, we played a show. I think, go ahead, Jack.
I was going to say, and I think, you know, this era of things in like that mid to late 90s was like right before, that's like the last little time frame before everybody started documenting everything they do all day long. So there isn't a lot of, you know, there's so many bands that I love from that time frame that there's just not a lot of information about them. And so when you stumble across anything or like a picture or you know, an article or something, it's almost surprising because there just wasn't, you know, not everybody was just going around. Everything existed in like zines and like physical copies of things. So unless you have those things to read them, you know, there isn't a lot of stuff. Like I remember finding like a few years ago, there was a band in North Carolina called Blank Face, and they were just, I thought they were amazing. They were this really great band, and they were all super young kids. But I was finding anything about them anywhere past that time frame, because I was like, I didn't have their stuff anymore. And I was one day just like, oh, I really want to hear this band. And I had to dig so far into the internet to happen to find like, you know, a clip of them somewhere. And so it's awesome to see, you know, this stuff get documented, because it's just not an era that has a lot of that, at least for the scene that we were in.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I remember like even back then, I remember Sunny Day Real Estate was like my all-time favorite band. And when the internet was around and you could like Google things, I would try to find any image of them as possible. And there was like 3 online, and I would just go like, but they were also kind of blurry, so I didn't really see what the band looked like, and I was like, it's so mysterious, what are they? And then the other day I found Jeremy Inick. He's on Instagram, and it's like him just, you know, posting shit, and then it's like him at a bar with his buddies. I'm like, oh my god, this is crazy. Like I get to see like everything that I would wanted to see back then. I have like possession to now, and I can stalk whoever I want to.
Yeah. I remember I think it was like 120 minutes on MTV or whatever, like Sunny Day Real Estate played, and like it was like one of the first YouTube, same like grainy old shitty quality, but I was like, oh fuck, this is awesome, and watching that over and over, because that was one of the only 3 clips. You're totally right.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right, so real quick, so I'm gonna kind of go back real quick, and we're gonna wrap this up. How'd you guys what finally like broke the band up?
It's cool if I go first, Jack.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think it was just a combination of things. Like we were kind of, you know, like, so the van
David's like,
stolen.
I just fucking hate Jack.
No, Jack's kind of a dick, and I just want to come clean right now. No, so when you're talking, like Jeremy and I, like Jeremy's like in and of his own right, is like incredible like musician and songwriter, like I think 10 times better like songwriter than I am and stuff. And he could have easily like headed the band himself or done stuff. So we kind of, I don't want to say butted head, but there was a lot of frustration. So like I think being in a van on the road for like months at a time, like we just kind of reached that boiling point. And like I don't want to say like, oh, we had like a little bit luck or enough gas money to make to the next town. It wouldn't have been as stressful, but like I always remember like, making the best of it and having some great experiences on tours, but always coming back like super fucking fatigued and being like broke and in debt, and like either it was like stolen bands or stolen equipment, or like, okay, how do I reintegrate back into life? And I found like a lot of my friends that were playing in the era, like it wasn't like there was anything like a blow up or a fist fight or anything crazy like that. It's just like, okay, like there's opportunity cost of pursuing this one thing. Like it makes it really difficult on relationships. And every time you leave town, like the world keeps going on without you, and you kind of have to reintegrate when you get back and stuff. And so at a certain point, like, when we had that last tour fall apart and we'd done the entire tour, like we still didn't have the fucking CD. Jeremy and I were arguing a lot. Like I was being a dick about shit that I shouldn't have been, and like a little too aggro. And so we got back, and I just kind of like, I was just like, man, I can't do this anymore. Like I have like thousands of dollars in credit card debt from like these t-shirts and like all this shit that, that we have to pay off. Like the van's fucked. Like I'm like falling behind in school. Like my girlfriend doesn't want to talk to anymore. And so, yeah, I just kind of, then I remember talking to Jack, and he's like, dude, are you sure you want to do this? Like we, just put out this record, like things. And I was just like, man, I want to, I just can't. And I just like, hey, Jack was super cool about it. And like, it's like, it is, and then, yeah, like, so that was like, so there was no like knockdown, drag out or anything crazy. I think it was just like, after like 3 years, like, I don't want to say it had run its course, but there was always a certain amount of like adversity or shit, like, gone wrong that we made the best of. But I don't think there was ever a point where we're like, this is like smooth, you put in X amount of effort and you get to a point where it's like, the machine runs on its own now. Like we were constantly like putting in a shit ton of energy to keep things going. And I think it just took its toll after a while. And like, as I started to get more into photography or, thinking about moving out of Tampa, and Jack was exploring the idea of like moving up to like Richmond and stuff. And so, yeah, that was kind of how it ended.
Yeah. You want to add anything there, Jack?
Yeah. I mean, it just wasn't, I think that says it pretty much the way that it was. It just sort of seemed like this kind of fatigue at the time. And then, there wasn't like a big blow up or like a scene that caused it. It just, I remember getting back from that tour and everybody was just kind of, I don't know, just kind of over it a little bit. And then it just sort of stopped being a thing where, I had a quick conversation with Dave about it and he's like, I don't really want to do this right now. And, yeah, we just kind of stopped doing it. and then of course, that was like right when that, Less Is a Nation History had come out. Yeah, it was just a weird thing. Like I didn't want it to end by any stretch, but I understood, and we all had other things going on. I mean, we're just, you're still going to work every day and dealing with relationships and dealing with school or whatever, you're in your early 20s just kind of figuring stuff out, and it ends up not being the most important thing to you. At least in the moment. And then maybe a year later, you're like, oh man, I really wish we hadn't stopped doing this.
Yeah. Like, did you guys feel that because Lessons in Ancient History came out? And I think that's when, when I heard that record, I was like, wow, like I really like this. Did you feel that, it was, you were kind of like bummed to see like, shit, we were going in this direction. I like where this is headed. And now we're never going to just be able to grow this.
Yeah, like first I felt horrible because like, Tim had invested like, whatever financial resources into like pressing the CDs and promoting it and stuff like, through Cat Records. And I was like, fuck, man, like I put that until that point, it's like, I was like, man, I don't think I've ever let anybody down or had to make that phone call. It's like, hey man, like you really did us a solid and like took a risk on us, but here's what's going on. And like, I fucking dreaded that more than anything.
Yeah.
But like, and looking back at that, I was like, and after the record came out, and like, I'm not saying that like the reception was great, but it was better than anything that we had done before. And I felt like as a band, like we had finally, the first couple of records were all over the place. We kind of like settled into what we were going to sound like or the direction that we were going and stuff. And so, part of me thinks like, oh man, like how would it have gone if we had that CD when we left for tour and just had enough money so we could feed ourselves every night. So like malnutrition wasn't driving people to the point of ferocity. But, you can always play that woulda, coulda, shoulda thing. And like, yeah, there was definitely points like after everybody like cooled down and I like mellowed out and stabilized where I'm like, fuck, man, I could have handled this differently, or maybe we should have just taken a break for a little bit. And so I do think that we kind of missed out on some opportunities, or we could have done more with it. And like, afterwards, like, Jack and I for like the next decade or two still been playing music together and doing different projects. But like I said, as we're getting older and lamer, like it's been, like smaller things or home recording kind of stuff, or not with the same, like, we're going to do this and get out on the road and tour and shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Why isn't it on Spotify?
I just actually sent Drew from Ashtray Monument. I sent him like all the My Pal Trigger stuff, and then Dakota Coastline was the next band that Jack and I did with some of the guys from that band Chester, and they went on to do like this band The Washdown that was on Lookout for a bit, and so we had a side project with those guys, and then when we moved to New York, we played in this band The New Red for like a year or so, and I just sent that stuff to Drew to throw up on Spotify. So yeah, all that stuff will be up there kind of soon.
So I would highly suggest, just like not highly, I would suggest, because like I said, my old band never had an Instagram. There was no need. But when we played, we just did a reunion show over the summer because basically the podcast got the conversation going, where people were like, you guys want to play like a show with Humble Beginnings? We're like, fuck yeah. And I started,
awesome.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was like 300 kids. Kids, my God.
Holy shit.
No, it was 300
That's
people.
awesome.
Yeah, we sold out this club in Jersey, and I started an Instagram account, and I had so much fucking fun with it because, and I still post stuff because we ended up putting our first record out on vinyl with Rob from Midtown, the drummer. He on his label he put it out, but. With you guys doing this stuff, it's a lot of fun to start an Instagram account and just post old stuff or like clips from songs and things like that. It's kind of a cool way to reconnect with people, and it opens up other possibilities. Like we're even thinking about like releasing like 2 new songs, and we live all over the place. Yeah, so I mean, there's all these ways to do this shit. And I haven't figured out I just haven't gotten. I have a song written, but I just haven't finished it. And all the other 3 guys are like, dude, what the fuck? Come on. But because of the technology now, like there's ways like maybe you guys could, if you want for fun, like do something like that, or I don't know. Just kind of throwing it out there because I think that because you guys are all, like you said, you're kind of, because I remember when you emailed me, you told me how you were going to get the songs up and things like that. And you probably have like a bunch of pictures. People are really looking for that stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, like I said, I've been slacking on this forever, and like I kind of got a little, I don't say over, but just like jaded with the whole social media thing, or any kind of self promotion. Like,
but if you use it well,
a little weird about.
If you use it well, where if it's not like a me, it's this is fun. It has a totally different feeling when you do it.
No, I get that. Yeah, I guess I'd have to like think about the approach and stuff. But yeah, that's why I was really stoked when like Drew and a couple other kids reached out and they're like, hey, do you have any old flyers? Do you have the songs? And I was like, hey, you're willing to post that? Awesome. Here you go. Here's a zip file.
You do it.
And so, yeah, normally like, I'm totally into the hands-on DIY stuff, but I was like, hey, if you'd like to do that, we'd be super appreciative.
Yeah. Yeah,
but yeah, I'm gonna get the website up. I'll have that up within the next couple of weeks and adding everything there and sending the rest of stuff to Drew. So yeah, like thanks to like you and his efforts and stuff, like we're hoping to get some of this stuff online and just archived. So maybe after people are done because we're running out of cool to recycle. Like we've gone all through like retro and 80s and 90s and even 2000 stuff. So maybe in 100 years, some space cyborg kid will dig up this this podcast or whatever and get inspired.
Do you guys have any? We actually just found 2 boxes of CDs that we never opened from the first pressing. Do you guys have any of that lying around? Or did you send them all off?
I have a handful. No, I have a handful of CDs of each of the releases. Somewhere, and I have a box of 7 inches where I have maybe 5 or 8 copies of each one. I'm sure somewhere in the world there's a big box of all of this stuff. I don't know how well any of these ever sold. And that goes back to when all these bands keep reuniting and even out here when I'll meet somebody that, oh yeah, man, I've heard of that band. I went to your show and, back in 1996. And I'm like, that's insane to me that anybody, it's still shocking to me sometimes when people are like, oh, I know what that is. I'm like,
yeah.
Really? How do you know what that is? Like, that's impossible. The guy that I'm in a band with right now, I met him because we worked at the same place and we were at like a company function and we're sitting at the bar and started talking about music. And it turned out that he'd gone to our show in Wyoming when he was like 15. And I'm like, that's nuts.
Wow.
Like, it's just so crazy to me, like that small world kind of thing. So it's always fun and surprising and interesting and flattering when anybody's ever heard anything that you've done. It's just kind of cool.
Yeah. It's so fucking awesome.
But yeah, I have no idea. Like, I don't know if Bob Conrad has a box of those lying around. I have no idea. Like, I don't know how many were sold. I honestly couldn't tell you how many were pressed.
Interesting. Maybe you should look for that. Something to do. All right, so I'm gonna wrap this up. So before I do that, what would you like to plug anything?
Jack?
Well, I have my band here in Denver is called Bad Year. We have a record coming out on April 4th that we're going to put out.
Okay.
We're actually going to press a fun little 12-inch one-sided cool thing here. And then I also was on the last Down by Law record that came out in 2018 that you
Really?
can hear.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So I started playing with them about 10 years ago.
Oh my God.
So I play with them off and on when I can. So that record came out, and then my band here, Bad Year. I've stayed fairly active over the years, playing in different bands, and I feel like I'm almost as active now as I was back then to a degree, except I don't tour because that's
sucky.
I can't imagine. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know friends of mine that tour when they get. It's changed so much where they're touring in what I consider luxury, where it's like if you get a hotel room every night or every other night, like that's not something that we ever experienced. So, but yeah, so that's what I've been up to lately, I guess.
Okay. Wow, that's crazy. What about you, David?
When I moved up back up to New York in 2001, like I was working just as a photographer for just doing a lot of fashion and editorial stuff for about a decade. In 2009, I started a company called E3 Motorcycles, where I do like a vintage motorcycle restoration, like old 60s and 70s Hondas and Triumphs mostly. So I did moto restoration for, I don't know, a better part of 10 years and kind of segued into doing leather craft. And so I have a company as well, like E3 Motorcycles and E3 Supply Co. And I do like a lot of like just handmade, like super nice like wallets and belts and watch bands. And so I run that company with my girlfriend, Mai, and my sister Erin, and my friend Stella. And so we got like a little workshop in New York City just cranking out that stuff. So yeah, gotten a little older and slower and quieter and lamer in my old days, and just kind of hang out old craftsman style in the studio, just stitching stuff up on the day to day.
Dude, that sounds awesome. No,
it's super fulfilling and so much fun.
Man.
And like I love working with my hands, like because of like division of labor, and like it's hard to find meaning in almost any job nowadays. And so being involved in some, like the whole DIY, all the shit that I learned from like My Pal Trigger days, and like screening our own T-shirts and our own doing as much as we could in house because we didn't have the means or the support otherwise. Like being able to incorporate that into like my methods of like doing business or how I run the company, like it's been kind of cool to see what I can port over and still make use of.
Yeah, I really think there's going to be a movement where people are going to start kind of shifting to physically made things again, and like companies who are doing what you're doing are going to get a lot more notice, just because everyone's going to be so, like we talked about, everyone's so attached to their screen right now. So there's nothing tangible. Like even if I buy something, I'm like, so I just gave you my money and it's on my phone. Like I can't hold it anymore.
Yeah.
So I think there's that dual of like buying things that you can actually hold and see and appreciate, but then creating them from scratch. Like that's wild. That's so cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah, there's an old like a tannery in Chicago called Horween that's been around since like 1909, and like the leathers they make are just like unparalleled. And so like it just feels awesome to work, like when you run your hand through like like grass or like sand, and it just feels neat, like working with nice materials all day. And then you can't really rush it, like everything's handmade one at a time. And so I find like that pacing or like that environment, like for me anyway at this point in my life, is like it's nice, or it's like it's soothing. Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's all I want to plug. Just been stitching away and making motorcycles these days.
Yeah, just simply just making things with leather and motorcycles. Nothing big. All right. So the last question I ask everybody, and you guys could choose who goes first each time, but what scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
I'd say like the whole DIY, like the DIY method. Like I still to this day refuse to, and even when it's like financially viable or makes more sense, like use building motorcycles as an example. Like I could send something out to get welded or like powder coating to be done or a tank stripped, and it cost me $40 at like whatever machine shop or powder coating facility. But the idea is like, fuck, if I do that, then I didn't make this. Like somebody else, like they did the hard work or the dirty part, and I'm taking credit for it. So I'd spend all this money on machinery or tooling, or stay up at night reading tutorials or manuals trying to how to learn to use this archaic equipment so I could accomplish a task that would be easier done just by outsourcing it. And so there's still to this day, like, you know, the ethic, like I always said, like, if, you know, like for all the shitty companies that I've ever worked for, felt like I was taken advantage by, I was like, man, if I ever own my own business, like the employees, like if I do well, the employees are going to do well. So like I pay the people that, you know, I work with as much as I possibly can. We do profit sharing at the end of the year, like any money that's left over. And so it's a very, I don't know, I'd like to say like equal environment. So like the whole, like literally like all the ethics and the way of doing business and treating people and like the whole grassroots, like less is more, like, you know, like I'm not trying to sell a gazillion things a year. I'd rather make 1,000 beautiful things a year. And so, yeah, like I've tried to take that stuff that I learned from the whole, like, you know, making zines at Kinko's and printing your own flyers and t-shirts and incorporate as like, you know, it's hard to figure out creative ways to feed yourself or cover rent or doctor bills on planet Earth in 2019. So it took some experimentation and stuff. But I was like, oh shit, here's a way, like it's not through music and stuff, but all the values and ideals and the valuable part that still resonate from like the old, you know, the punk rock community. Like I found ways, like, you know, I hope it doesn't sound too cheesy, but to kind of incorporate that into my day to day, or like, oh fuck, like I, you know, I'm older now and I have my own business, and I had the opportunity to see, like, you know, instead of charging more, outsourcing, or having stuff made in Shenzhen and Hong Kong, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this, you know, here, and I'm going to pay people a little bit more, like a working wage, and see if I can make this experiment work.
That's awesome. Oh, I
Thanks.
love that. Yeah, that's I love that. That's awesome.
Thanks, man.
All right, Jack. Tell us about your ethics.
I mean, I'd say kind of the same thing. Like, you know, clearly the DIY part of it is something that I think most bands from back then and have carried that into what they do now, because it was so much like what you created was what you created. Like there wasn't, you know, if you wanted shirts, you made shirts. If you wanted CDs, like you literally went to Kinko's and printed off the covers. And you know, for the Bad Year stuff that we're putting out, like we're actually getting together in like 10 days we're going to screen print one side of the record, and we're doing that ourselves. Like you can send that off to go somewhere, but you know, we're going to do it sort of still in a DIY way. And then also I think, you know, just that kind of sense of community that existed back then that I'm sure exists in some way now. And we try to do that. Like I enjoy so much more playing like smaller places and playing, you know, with the same bands, and everybody kind of helping each other out, where, you know, you're trying to develop that scene where it's like, okay, well, there's this band and we're going to keep playing with them, and we'll, you know, put out Split 7 Inches and that kind of stuff. That's maybe more of a throwback, where instead of it just being like, how do I promote my band to be more successful and blah, versus, hey, it's all our stuff and we're all together in this, and it's a big, hey, here are these 12 bands that all kind of play shows together all the time. And like that's one of my favorite things, and one of the things that I've always wanted to make sure that I participated in and championed was that kind of feeling of like supporting the bands around you, and then they support you, and then it just feels good, and it feels like this, you know, community again. Because I think there was a thing that we walked away from that, in that, not we, but you know, bands where it's just sort of you on an island, and you have a Facebook page, and you have them, you know, your Spotify, and you're sort of going it alone in some respects, where, you know, when you don't do that and you do develop and nurture a scene, it feels good. And I think, you know, Jersey always had that, where it was always, there was that great sense of community. I think, you know, every town has it, and Tampa did too. And those were the things that I've always cherished and carried, you know, with me for that purpose. So